G'day, mate. Luke Ford here. I want to start with Scott Adams' recent conversation about the
For the
coronavirus.
most productive.
I think essentially the coronavirus is going to push us to do things that we should probably already be doing as a society. Firstly, we do need to practice higher and higher levels of hygiene in this highly interconnected world. Who doesn't want to be cleaner all the time? Everybody I've ever met is clean. Everybody admires people who are cleaner than them. Everybody likes going to places that are super practical. Everybody, when they first go to Japan, has the reaction of, oh my God, look how clean they are. And it's never looked down on them. It's always looked up at them. So I think as a society, it will make us more hygiene conscious, which will help us just reduce spreads of common cold, basic flu. So I think in that sense is very helpful. Secondly, I think it'll move us more towards the future faster. Robotics, automation, telepresence, VR, remote work, all those things that are coming anyway. I mean, let's face it, most of white-collar jobs are LARPing, right? Running around pretending like you're doing work meetings, but I think we'll expose a lot of that. The actual productivity of most white-collar jobs is a small creative portion, which this will emphasize. And it'll force us to sort of make that, solve the collective action problem moving to those tools. And I think it'll also cause us to do basic preparedness for viruses and bacteria that we need as a society, because biology is getting easy spreading more. So it's only a matter of time before we see engineered viruses and bioweapons. And so as a society, if we're better prepared for that, good. That's particularly.
Yeah, I saw your tweet in which you referred to it as essentially a series of wars that we, the big creatures of Earth, the humans, are going to have with the small creatures, the viruses.
Yeah, this has always been true. If you look at humans, we've been the apex predators on the planet for a long time. Ever since we discovered fire or the tool, we've basically taken over and killed everything else. Right? As soon as humans invented spears, axes, and fire, that was it. And every other species got driven into extinction or domestication to the point now where the lowest ranking human outranks the highest ranking animal. Like the top, dog in the world is lower status than most humans. You would put that animal down if it attacked that human. So we've conclusively won against all the big. So our remaining natural predators, actually they're not quite predators, they consider us their habitat, are bacteria and viruses. And that's a very broad generalization. I think plants, fungi. Obviously, there are good bacteria and even good viruses that are symbiotic. But for every symbiote in the animal kingdom, there's 6 parasites. That's the rough ratio. So bacteria and viruses are our last major main enemies. One exception, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are actually cause damage to us by carrying bacteria and viruses. Right? Flying needles, right? So bacteria and viruses compete with us, and there's this hypothesis called the Red Queen, named after Alice in Wonderland, where the Red Queen and her guards running fast, they're all kind of running in place against each other to the ground. So the idea there is that bacteria and viruses evolve to compete with us and infest us, and we evolve in such a way to get away from it. And so we use sexual selection. Scott Adams goes to find Christina Basham. This goes through a long selection cycle, and then your genes mix with her genes, and your children, which I hope you will have, to resist viruses. And viruses are mutating. They're not intelligent. Other viruses to mate with. They're not sexual. They're asexual. But they're just replicating mindlessly, mutating. So they're much less likely to pick the right gene. But they're so short-lived, getting many more mutations. And if you look at the amount of genetic variation that a bacteria or virus get over 20 years, it's roughly similar to what a human will get. But a human will do it by wandering around their entire life and finding proper mate genes. But the bacteria or virus will do it just by massive amounts of mutation. So there has always been this race going on, this red queen style race, bacteria, viruses, us, and we fight through genetic selection and mate selection, and they fight through mutation. And now, because of huge interconnectedness, human environments, traveling around airplanes, shaking hands and doing a lot of business with each other, we're spreading these bacteria and viruses faster. We also have a much larger population, so now you have 7 or 8 million hosts which bacteria mutate, as opposed to a few 100,000 years. So we need to use technology to combat that, to offset, and things like vaccines, therapeutics, hand washing, hygiene, antibiotics, social distancing, etc. That's kind of my general.
Do you think it's reasonable? I've seen a few people hypothesize that because of how we're changing our lifestyles to protect ourselves from all this stuff, that we might actually end up saving lives, even if the coronavirus is pretty bad. We could end up ahead. Is that possible?
Yeah, there's some data around that out of Hong Kong showing social distancing working. Hong Kong was hit very badly by SARS, so they reacted very quickly and focused to what happened in China. And basically, people just stayed indoors. And forget about what the government does. The government will have to save themselves in a decentralized manner. And people in Hong Kong just stayed indoors and wore masks, and they washed their hands, and they kept their distance from each other. And you can see in the data that not only the coronavirus stopped spreading, but everything went down. So the influenza went down, colds went down, and other viruses went down. So it works. And viruses have very specific methods in how they spread, and a human being is a much smarter entity than any given virus. So if each one of us is taking care of ourselves, the problem takes care of itself.
So let's talk about some of the news. It's tough to peer into this fog of war and know what's true. So China is saying that they've got at least maybe they've turned the corner and the new cases are less than they had been. Do you think that's real? Do you think China's given us a straight scoop? I mean, they acted pretty aggressively. Could be true.
I do believe them. And it's not that I believe them because I think the government there is a paragon of transparency and virtue. I think it's because they don't gain much by lying. If they lie and if things not under control and everybody starts going back to business as usual, people start dropping it again. And that's going to be a disaster.
But they have lied up till now. Pretty much everybody agrees.
So it seems that most people are saying that China is telling the truth with regard to its effectiveness of reducing coronavirus cases. So there is plenty of skepticism, but also it appears that all sorts of clinics, there are outsider empirical evidence that all sorts of clinics are not seeing a flood of new patients in China. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. I'm interested in this book on biopolitics, or political biology, called Predisposed Liberals, Conservatives, and the Biology of Political Differences, because I think there are big political differences in the way we react to things like the coronavirus. The traditional approach, the conservative approach, the right-wing approach is to have a much bigger, a much more dramatic disgust reaction. Okay, so if you show liberals and conservatives the same picture of a dangerous snake about to strike, the conservatives will have a much bigger disgust reaction. Also, conservatives, people on the right, put a much greater stress on purity and on cleanliness and those kind of values, while for the left, the primo value is instead equality. So a lot of my friends are saying that this coronavirus will be really bad for Trump's re-election. We've got the stock market down 7-8% today. Enormous 2,000-point drop. That the economy appears headed for recession. So this would be really bad for Trump's election. On the other hand, it seems to me that all the issues that this brings up are all breaking in Trump's favor. Like, who's going to want more globalism after this? Now that we realize so many of our medicines are manufactured in China, so many of our vital health supplies are manufactured in China, don't you think countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, England, France are going to realize, hey, we need to develop our own pharmaceutical industry, we need to develop our own manufacturing base for vital health items like masks and various pharmaceutical products? I just can't see that after the coronavirus, people will say, oh, we just need more globalism, we need more unlimited travel across borders. I think the natural reaction to this sort of epidemic is to be conservative, small c, to retreat, to build your borders up stronger, to even retreat to your homes. I know that I have desisted from all optional socializing. So tonight is Purim, and tens of thousands of Jews around the world will be going to synagogue to celebrate Purim, but I don't think I'm going to go. And I think a significant number of Jews who would normally go celebrate Purim in synagogue tonight are not going to go. It just seems ill-advised to go to church or synagogue right now, to go to sporting events, to go to events like the Los Angeles Marathon yesterday, which brought in about 27,000 people to LA. Like, Italy is essentially closed down. Italy is telling people not to leave the house unless it's for an emergency, unless they absolutely have to for work or for vital healthcare. So the way that China contained this outbreak was essentially authoritarian quarantine efforts, and it just seems crazy to me to go out into large public gatherings right now. We'll have to monitor this, but I don't know why people would go to church or synagogue or to sporting events right now. All right, I want to go back onto this book, Predisposed Liberals, Conservatives, and the Biology of Political Differences. So across a range of topics, the mean responses of liberals consistently favored the new experience, the abstract, and the non-conforming. Right? That's not an approach that really works well for things like the coronavirus. Conservatives just as consistently favored traditional experiences that were closer to reality and predictable patterns. Conservatives preferred their poems to rhyme and fiction that ended with a clear resolution. Liberals were more likely to write fiction or to attend a musical concert. So conservatives like a clear ending more than liberals. Experimental or rhythmic verse, amorphous storylines, and ambiguous endings just do not trip the triggers of many conservatives, and they're much less likely to perform in these areas. People who score high on openness, such as liberals, tend to like envelope-pushing music and abstract art. People who score high on conscientiousness, much more likely to be organized, faithful, and loyal. So which of these innate biological responses to stimuli is going to better serve one in the age of the coronavirus? Liberal likely sees a moral wrong when an individual is being socially ostracized. Conservative is more likely to take into account communal considerations in formulating a moral judgment. So which approach here is more effective for things like the coronavirus? Is that guy being ostracized because he's Chinese, because he's not one of us, because he was disloyal, because he broke the rules or thumbed his nose at the accepted way of doing things? If the answer to these sorts of questions is yes, then the conservative view is that he had it coming. Liberals wanted dogs that were gentle and related to their owners as equals. Conservatives wanted dogs that were loyal and obedient. The left is characterized by a desire for the new and the novel, a commitment to individual expression and a tolerance of difference. The right by a desire for order and security, a commitment to tradition and to group loyalty. So which instinctive biologically programmed reaction here is more likely to serve you in the age of corona? Individuals have varying densities of chemical receptors at key areas in the brain. They have differently shaped neural organs and neurotransmitter levels in synapses. The effectiveness of drugs such as Ritalin and Prozac make it clear that decisions and behaviors are biological. If artificially adjusting chemical levels in the brain affects attitudes and actions, so naturally occurring variations would have the same effect. So it's very possible that people on the right and people on the left have biologically slightly different brains, different levels of neurotransmitters. The only way for society to function may be with a legal system that denies it is biologically more challenging for some people to do good, that asserts that all people are the same in terms of their ability to know right from wrong. But that is obviously absurd. That's not reality. So, United States today, doctors cannot operate across state lines. That seems crazy. That seems crazy. Doctors can't operate across state lines. Looking at a tweet here, let's be honest, we would all be better off Michael Bloomberg were heading the virus response rather than Donald Trump. So press 1 if you think Michael Bloomberg would do better responding to the coronavirus as America's chief executive rather than Donald Trump. Now, many of my friends and peers have stopped going to 12-step meetings. Those who do have noted that people have stopped holding hands at the end of the meeting and they've stopped passing out the readings. And how come we don't know the name of the CPAC donor? All of our elite ruling class that was at CPAC and that was exposed to this person with the coronavirus, apparently a big donor because he was meeting with elite members of the political establishment. How come we don't know the name of this guy? Now, almost all synagogues that I see are having normal schedules for Purim, but that seems to me to be ill-advised. And how come we don't know the name of this CPAC donor? There are thousands of people who went to CPAC and they may have met this guy, and it would seem like the socially responsible thing to do is identify this person. To me, the public good is more important here than personal privacy. So I'm sure some of you actually know the name of the CPAC donor with coronavirus who exposed all sorts of Republican politicians. So if you know the name of this guy, I want the story. And how come the news media isn't naming this guy? This seems like a public issue, a pressing public issue, that we should know the identity of the CPAC donor who was positive for the coronavirus and exposed dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people. Doctors cannot operate across state lines in the United States, but doctors with questionable degrees from third world countries are welcome to come here and practice. Yeah, they do have to pass some boards, some tests. They can't just cross the border and start practicing. But yeah, that is disturbing. So in California, they changed it from a felony to a misdemeanor to intentionally spread HIV, to intentionally transmit HIV. So what about intentionally spreading the coronavirus? In California, I would assume that's only a misdemeanor. And that's crazy, because we've got the story in Italy. Patient zero apparently was a Pakistani immigrant who tested positive for the coronavirus, was told to quarantine himself, and instead he kept cooking food and kept delivering food. And this one Pakistani immigrant was responsible for a vast spread of coronavirus, which is currently bringing Italy to its knees. And what do you guys understand about the price of oil? It's now down to about $30 a barrel. It dropped about $25 overnight. And apparently, I'm reading, Russia can produce oil more cheaply than Saudi Arabia. So it appears that Putin can take out our shale industry. At $30 a barrel, our shale industry is not profitable. I think the very cheapest part of our shale industry is around $40 a barrel, $45 a barrel. So let's see what the oil markets do. But if oil remains under $40 a barrel, then America's shale industry essentially shuts down. And that's not one-sidedly bad or good for the American economy. I think overall lower oil prices is slightly better for the American economy because we got far more oil consumers than we do producers. So for the average American, this dramatic drop in oil prices will have the same effect as a tax cut. They'll have far more money in their pocket. Also thinking that coronavirus discourages the libertarian approach because your choices could kill me. Like if you've been told to self-quarantine and you don't, and you go out and transmit something deadly, I think this coronavirus will encourage issues that favor Donald Trump. It will encourage a nationalistic approach or encourage growing domestic industries for vital health supplies and pharmaceuticals. And for all vital industries, we'll see the need to make things at home. We will also see the need for strong borders, for travel bans. So when Trump implemented his travel ban against anyone coming who's been to China, so he implemented that at the end of January, the news media just arose saying this is ridiculous. Like, what does the news media have against travel bans? You'll notice in many of their stories about the coronavirus, they keep talking about this just proves that the travel bans don't work. But to me, it shows the very opposite. It shows that we need how much we need travel bans, how much we need to be very careful about who we let in, because you just let in one person like that Pakistani immigrant into Italy who is apparently patient zero, at least in the Normandy region, and dozens of people caught coronavirus as a result of his bad behavior. I think we need to be highly selective about the type of people we allow into this country, and to me, that type of political issue would break in Donald Trump's favor. Tourism industry is the biggest in the world, says Church. Entropy of tourism takes a hit, the stock market will follow. Will set in a domino effect which will lead many industries into decline. And the chat says Stephen Pinker says the coronavirus disproves the need for borders. That's nuts. I think most people are going to understand the need for borders, for travel bans, and for domestic production as a result of the coronavirus. Let me go back here to Scott Adams in conversation with a scientist.
Press it when they thought that it was just they're also, China is more decentralized. It takes time to filter up to the big bosses level. It's a very large country. It's not a single unified monarchy. So I think they were definitely not the most competent in their initial handling of it. But I don't think that they're overtly close to time. I think the bigger danger with China is that as they return to institutions, spread again. But they're countervailing factors, like it's going to get warmer, and people on average are going to be a lot more careful. Even if they say go back to work, everybody tomorrow, they're all going to be wearing masks still. They're all going to be washing their hands all the time. They're not going to be hugging each other. They're not going to be close quarters. And my guess is that public events and buffets, church and gatherings, and so on, those stuff will flow. And the cruise ship industry is dead, never to return, unfortunately.
I think you're right about that. I had a plumber come over yesterday, and I tried for the first time the non-handshake greeting. He put out his hand, and I did that. Coronavirus. Sorry,
right.
Nothing personal. And I was sort of testing it out to see, does it work social? and it was a little bit awkward, but not enough that I'm not going to do it again. So,
Well, the easiest way to handle that one is something I've been doing for months now. I just tell people I'm just getting over a cold, and they just back off. So it's basically it's not you, it's me.
That excuse would never work better than today.
Exactly. So that would be my advice to people. Just say I'm getting over a cold.
I got a little chest tightness here.
Exactly.
Keep your distance. Now, there was an article I just read about the cruise ship, which, for all the wrong reasons, it turned out to be the best laboratory because you had people in a closed setting. You could really know who these people are, and then you could look at the results. And one of the outcomes of that is that nobody under 70 has died, and of over 700 people infected on that ship. So that's impressive. But also, they did not get care that quickly. They were not identified that quickly. If you assume that only the older people were even affected, and now that we know that's where the real risk is, we could really put sort of a wall around our oldsters. Isn't it possible that even if this virus is 10 times more viral, that because the people dying from it can be easily identified and walled off, isn't there at least some hope that now that we're no longer caught off guard, we could drive down the death rate to ordinary flu levels?
Yeah, I don't think it goes down to ordinary flu levels. I think it's much worse. For one thing, it's far more virulent. The R0 spread factor is multiple.
But that's what the virus itself can do. But if you factor in our response to it,
sure,
we would effectively lower it.
That's true. I think we can effectively lower it, but I think it's going to require a level of self-quarantine hygiene the American population is currently engaged in. At least in San Francisco, 99% is business as usual. And if it's going to spread anywhere, it's San Francisco, because your cold urban environment is directly interconnected to Asia. So I walk around the street, nobody's wearing masks. Everyone's still going to events, gathering, people are still shaking hands and high-fiving. So we do not have anywhere near the level of lower spread factor. Secondly, it does kill people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. It's just statistically a lot. But it has a high comorbidity rate. So if you have an existing condition, which could actually just be a flu or cold, it can go haywire on you. So 20-somethings and 30-somethings have died from just under 10 categories. The children seem to be immune to it.
Well, what's interesting about the cruise ship is that there were enough people that we should have seen 30-year-olds dying if people who had good modern care were going to die, and none of them.
Yeah,
so that's pretty telling.
Yeah, the counter argument is also who has good modern care, because the current ICU system, the intensive care.
Okay, I want to play something from Roosh. He says you unable to judge a woman if you sleep with her.
A girl, it is impossible to judge her value. Impossible. You cannot judge a girl's value if sex is on your mind at all. You will never know her. If you started considering a woman for a wife after you've been sleeping with her, you will never know. Never. You will never know who she really is. I thought it was the opposite. Oh, I only know her after I sleep with her. The real her comes out. No, the real her is always there. It's just that when you have sex on your mind, when you see her as a, I hate to use this word, receptacle for your pleasure, you cannot judge her. You just have no idea. Now, you spend time with a girl without the sex. Now you see what her value is. Of course, if you have sex with a girl, you see a part of her. Yeah. You see the passion side, the intimacy side. But when you have sex with her, who she really is concealed from you, because you made the mistake in sleeping with her. But you don't even have to have sex with her for this to happen. If you're consumed with lust and you see her in a sexual way, let's say this. Let's say there's a Christian, a man who is young, he's 18, and he wants to hurry up and get married to have sex. He looks at porn. So he finds a girl who's cute. And yes, she is perfect. She is a Christian just like me. So consumed by the day he cannot wait to sleep with her. He can't judge her either. Only a man who is in control of his lust and how he spices that I.
Whoops.
Now, so he finds a girl who's cute. And yes, she is perfect. She is a Christian just like me. So consumed by the day he cannot wait to sleep with her. He can't judge her either. Only a man who is in control of his lust and how he sees a woman can judge a woman for her value, the values that matter, especially concerning faith. A woman who has given you sex can be the worst actress in the world, but you'll get fooled. Because even a girl is born with acting ability that exceeds your ability to know whether she's acting or not. So this is what you have to understand. So if you like a girl, is this girl for me? If you're having sex with her, you won't know. You're rolling the dice. Go to Vegas. You have better odds, or the same odds. Go to the roulette table. Bet on black, bet on red. You got 50% chance. What is the divorce rate in the United States? Something like 50%, right? That doesn't include all of the beta males who stay in a marriage where their woman is cucking them. So I would say that probably unsatisfied marriages are high too. If you have sex with a girl, good luck, because you're going. And I look back, all the women I thought, hey, they were good enough for a long term. I was so wrong. I mean, that's the best advice that I. Now, if you have sex before you get married, if you're having sex with your girlfriend, I don't judge you. You do what you want to do. It's your life. I'm telling you, what I know is truth is that when you're consumed by lust, you cannot properly judge a girl. You just cannot. You don't have that skill. See, it's almost like God sets a trap up for people. If they don't follow his rules, a negative outcome is likely to follow. Who would have thought?
So Roosh there, tapping into ancient wisdom, that isn't just something that Roosh came up with. It's something that our elders have said down through the ages. All right.
Today we're going to be turning to Leviticus. And Leviticus is a primary document of the priestly school. And we identify this work as priestly because it deals with matters that were of special concern to and under the jurisdiction of priests.
So this is Christine Hayes from Yale University.
Sanctuary, its cultic rituals, the system of sacrifices, the distinction between the holy and the profane, and the pure and the impure. So the priestly materials are found as a block in Leviticus, large part of Numbers, and then they're scattered throughout Genesis and Exodus. And because of these common themes, we say that they were produced by a priestly school. We hypothesize a priestly school. We don't quite clearly understand exactly what that means and who and exactly when. These materials emerged over a period of centuries, that's clear. They reach their final form in the exilic or post-exilic period, but they certainly often preserve older cultic traditions and priestly traditions as well. We can break the book of Leviticus down into the units that are listed on that side of the board. You have in chapters 1 through 7 the sacrificial system. Chapters 8 through 10 recount the installation of Aaron as high priest and the Aaronites then as the priestly clan within Israel. Chapters 11 through 15 cover the dietary system, the dietary laws, as well as the ritual purity laws. Chapter 16 describes the procedure to be followed on the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Chapters 17 through 26 then are a block of material that's referred to as the Holiness Code.
And looking at this crazy tweet here from Steven Pinker, March 1st, the coronavirus pandemic is one of many reasons neo-nationalism is destructive and ultimately futile. Viruses like greenhouse gases, cyber criminals, dark money, terrorist pirates, and technology don't care about lines on a map. Yeah, but if you care about preserving your people, preserving your civilization, then you have every incentive to be careful about who you allow into your civilization. Seems like taking care to protect your family, protect your home, protect your country is just common sense.
Because of its special emphasis on holiness. So most scholars think that that block of material comes from a different priestly school, and so we designate that H, holiness. The relative dates of P and H, P now meaning the non-H parts of the priestly materials, they're much debated, but I think increasingly the consensus is that H, the block of material in Leviticus 17 through 26, and then also with its...
So I remember I was covering the Mark Wallace story, and I uncovered this guy. He was spreading HIV around the porn industry back in 1996, 97, 98. And when that news came out, I remember it was a particular Torah portion. It's the Torah portion Tazria, which really stands for purity. So I think religious people and traditional people have much more of an innate sense of cleanliness and of purity and the need for discrimination and the need for cleanliness and the need for purity than do secular people and those on the left.
Got passages scattered around other parts of the Bible. But the consensus increasingly is that H is later. It's a redactor or editor of the other priestly materials. So P is a difficult term of reference because P can refer to the entirety of priestly writings altogether. But when we single out H and talk about H, then P in contrast to H means the priestly writings that are not H. So maybe small p and a capital P, I don't know. Now the priestly materials have for a long time been, I think, a devalued part of the Hebrew Bible. And scholarship of the 19th century and most of the 20th century is generally characterized by a deep-seated bias that views impurity rules as primitive and irrational taboos and sacrifice as controlled savagery that's empty of any spiritual.
So it was in April of 1998 that tracked down and published the information that this porn star, real name Mark Goldberg, he was HIV positive. And the chat says that Mark Wallace was a man ahead of his time. Today he would be hailed as a hero. So he was a drug user, he was bisexual, and he was reckless. And the Torah portion that week was from Leviticus chapter 12 to chapter 14, Zarat, which can be translated as impurity or leprosy. And the Talmudic sages suggest that Zarat is the means through which God sends an individual a message of spiritual rebuke. It's perhaps scales on the skin, it's something disgusting. And so he had this guy going around just recklessly spreading HIV, just like many people today, just recklessly spreading the coronavirus. And it seems like we need to use good judgment about who we allow in our homes, who we even shake hands with anymore, who we allow into our lives. And when you've got people who are reckless in the way they may use dirty IV needles, engage in unprotected anal sex, men who engage in practices that dramatically increase your chances of getting HIV, and then to have sex with people while you've got this lethal disease, it's just absolutely demonic. The human being can act like a demon. He can defy all that is good, just, and holy, and he can wreck an entire community. Like just one person's idiotic driving can stall a commute for 25,000 people. Can cost 100,000 work hours because of one idiot's behavior. So that's why I think the need for discrimination. We need to be very careful about who we allow to drive, who we allow into our countries, who we allow into our lives. Right, I want to go to a terrific book here by Rabbi Jacob Milgram on the book of Leviticus, and does a survey of this book, which seems like it'd be the last book in the world that you'd want to study. It seems really boring, but I think it's directly applicable to situations like this coronavirus outbreak.
Meaning, religion without such rights is evolutionarily superior or higher, more spiritually meaningful. With those kinds of attitudes, it's not difficult to understand why scholarship on Leviticus and those parts of the Bible tend to be rather dismissive. In the latter part of the 20th century, the situation began to change. As anthropologists and ethnographers began to study the danger avoidance practices of many cultures, the taboos and rituals of many cultures, including modern Western culture, new avenues for understanding the danger avoidance practices of the Bible began to emerge. The anthropologist Mary Douglas changed forever the way scholars would approach the impurity rules of the Bible, because she insisted on their interpretation as symbols that conveyed something meaningful to those who followed them. Biblical scholars like Jacob Milgram and more recently Jonathan Klawans, attuned to developments in the social sciences, have made very great advances in our understanding of Israelite purity practices. They've tended to view the elaborate and carefully constructed texts of P as part of a system whose meaning derives from the larger cultural matrix or grid in which those materials are embedded. How much the system laid down by P represents what ordinary Israelite Judeans thought and did, how much these rules were actually enacted and followed, how much they drew upon older random practices, brought them together, modified them, imposed some semblance of order upon them, how much they represent just the ideal construction or blueprint of an elite group. These are all unanswerable questions. The fact is, no one really knows. But we do know from living cultures that people do engage in all kinds of ritual and symbolic actions because of genuine beliefs about the importance of those actions, because those rituals and symbols are extraordinarily meaningful to them. And in any event, our primary concern is with the program of the text as they stand before us. Is there a symbolism operating here? What are the key ideas and the key themes of the priestly material? How do these ideas, how does this material jive with other aspects of Israelite religion that we've talked about so far? What ultimately is the purpose toward which these materials are aiming? Well, like the rest of the ancient world, Israel had a cultic system, and that cultic system featured a sanctuary, a sacred space with holy objects, sacred objects, where priests performed a variety of ritual acts. Israelite Judean religion on the ground shared many cultic forms and practices and rituals with Canaanite and ancient Near Eastern culture generally. Sanctuaries in the ancient world were understood to be the dwelling place of the deity. Sacrifices were offered to the deity in his or her sanctuary. He describes a portable sanctuary, mishkan, that's used in the wilderness period.
So, do you think that this HIV outbreak is going to be good or bad for Trump's re-election? So I was asking friends, and I began with asking them, what rating would you give for Trump for his 3 years, 2 months in office so far? And my friends give him ratings from 4 to 7. So I said 6. That's how I would rate Trump's first 3 years in office. So one friend said Trump's stock market tweets were stupid, but I don't think the votes he needs to win are stock market dependent, nor are they on Twitter. Question is, will they hold him accountable if oil shock causes job losses in fracking states like Texas and Pennsylvania? If Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee, Trump can hit him hard on the Iraq war vote. Trump will never get a better moment to go all in on nationalism than now. As the Chinese say, crisis equals opportunity. Can't imagine how anyone could look at the world and say only one man can save us, and his name is Joe Biden. Another friend, unemployment is going to surge over the next month. The entire travel, leisure, entertainment sector is tanking. That was Trump's only strong point for the broad electorate, the economy. Trump is still trying to talk the market up, minimize things, and he isn't taking sufficient action with the coronavirus. Let's not forget that Trump won by thousands of votes across the Rust Belt. So if about 200,000 votes had gone the other direction, certain key states Trump would not have won 2016. Trump was too afraid to say anything that would upset Tim Apple because Apple is so heavy in stock market indices. Now that Apple's already getting hit, he might as well talk about repatriating American industry. It's a good campaign message for swing states. The states are going to get very hard as the economy slows into a recession. And surprising that Democrats are voting for Joe Biden at all. He's clearly going senile. Could Americans possibly vote for him come November? Is a Biden vote a protest vote by the silent majority of the middle-of-the-road Democrats who don't like the left-wing lurch of the party? Maybe Biden will adopt the Clinton approach and minimize his exposure until November. But eventually, Joe Biden will be forced to make public statements of an analytical nature, and I think we know how that will go. People are desperate enough to vote for almost anyone as the economy slows into a recession. Trump is mismanaging this health crisis. He's overruled his health officials on whether to advise at-risk individuals to fly. But yes, Biden is clearly demented. Joe Biden's VP pick is competent. People won't care as much as you might think about Joe. None of the Biden gaffes came in debates. You guys agree that Trump's approach to this epidemic has been terrible? Scott Adams says it's been great. So press 1 if you think that Trump's approach to the coronavirus epidemic has been terrible. Press 2 if you think it's been good. So has Trump canceled rallies? Is that on? And what about the NBA and the NHL? Still no restrictions. Still no restrictions when people come through customs from overseas, such as from Italy. Spring training games at baseball or full stadiums. Trump should clearly cancel rallies at this stage. It's totally irresponsible to pack people together, many of whom are older. Not cancel rallies. Well, look terrible from a public health perspective. It's a terrible idea because the virus is so unpredictable. Trump should not have tweeted what he did today, saying it's not as bad as the flu. Canada, we have 0 flight and travel restrictions. Someone can fly here from Wuhan without being placed in a quarantine. There are no restrictions, no impediments. On the other hand, it's perfectly possible the virus will play itself out, the markets will rebound. So there is reason to believe that as the weather gets warmer in the United States, that will significantly reduce viral transmission. Friend says there's no upside to not treating coronavirus seriously. If it fizzles out, Trump doesn't pay a penalty. He'll look proactive and claim he solved it. But if the virus gets worse, which is what's happening now, he'll pay a heavy political price. Wonder what Kyle thinks about coronavirus. Is it hysterics or is it warranted? Hysteria by definition is excessive. Being concerned and taking precautionary measures warranted. And today's dramatic stock market drop isn't necessarily coronavirus related. Regional banks with huge energy loans have to concede the loans are impaired and write them down. Fed rate cuts hurts them with tiny margins for lending. Goal at this stage is to contain and mitigate the coronavirus spread to limit pressure on the healthcare system. There's an explosion in cases, particularly among the elderly. The death rate will be higher than it would have been if those cases were spread out over time. How seriously can the public take the crowd warnings when they turn on TV, watch LeBron play in front of a packed arena? People are waking quickly. Today's sell-off is connected to Italy, placing itself in recession to combat the coronavirus, thus causing renewed concerns about sovereign defaults, along with Japan and Australia falling into recession, the implosion of oil, junk bonds. What will happen to real estate prices? The US enters a recession, they'll trend sideways or dip on the market. The US was already on wobbly footing heading into this health crisis. Canada's banks are heavily leveraged oil and gas. Oil producing states, housing, real estate prices should crash. Who loses? Current trajectory. Anyone impacted by the oil industry, travel, leisure, restaurants. Those businesses are at serious risk along with their employees, all the banks tied to them. Okay, let's get back to Christine Hayes lecturing on Leviticus.
Period. If you look on your handout, there's a reconstruction of this tent-like sanctuary at the top, as well as a schematization of its contents below. So woven curtains hung from wooden frames that could easily be assembled and disassembled, and these curtains surround the sacred precinct. You see that in the top picture. And within those precincts, within that enclosure, there's a large open courtyard. That was accessible to all Israelites. A main sacrificial altar with a large ramp stood in that courtyard, as well as a basin that was there for ablutions. And then halfway across the courtyard, there was a screen that marked the entrance to another little enclosure, which is the shrine proper, the sanctuary proper. And only priests have access to that area. The shrine or sanctuary housed an incense altar, and then on one side a 7-branch lampstand or menorah, and on the other a table which held loaves of bread that were changed on a weekly basis. The backmost square-shaped chamber of that inner shrine was the inner sanctum, or the Holy of Holies, and that was accessible only to the high priest and only on the Day of Atonement, following a series of heightened purity observances. Inside that Holy of Holies was the ark, about 4 feet by 2.5 feet. It was a wooden ark covered in gold. On top was a kind of covering. It's referred to as a kaporet. We don't really know what this word means. It's traditionally translated mercy seat. I think that's how the JPS might translate it. But it's some kind of gold cover. And then there were 2 cherubim, these enormous winged lions that flanked the ark. Likely they were connected to that mercy seat cover. If so, then what they were was a throne. And we have in ancient Near Eastern iconography thrones of this type. We have pictures of gods and kings seated on these seats, the sides of which are these giant winged cherubim, and then their feet rest on a footstool. Likewise, in some biblical verses, God...
So going back, scrolling through a discussion with friends today, when you consider how slim Trump's margins were and where those margins were located, states in which Joe Biden will likely perform well, that unemployment is going to rise and Trump is bungling this health crisis. I say things have shifted. A month ago, I would have bet on Trump's re-election. Now I bet on Biden. That Biden is a mess. Trump is a negligent fool. Trump is inviting Wall Street executives to the White House to discuss coronavirus on Wednesday. Great set of priorities. Another friend predicts Joe Biden will not be the nominee. The Democrats will do the math. Suddenly, Biden's Me Too moments will be very serious and unforgivable. And Trump talks to Jamie Dimon. How do we get down to 30,000? There's a serious domestic crisis. Trump is being put to the test. He's absolutely failing, says one friend. Trump's not going to be able to rely on the globalism shtick. The public absolutely wants more globalism in the context of managing this global health crisis, meaning global coordination. Another friend says, Alex, you are confusing coastal city dwellers with Trump voters. Another friend says, who would have thought that it was a real virus and not a computer virus that took down the American economy? Or perhaps the American economy was just a bubble looking for a pin. When those voters in the interior begin losing their service jobs, they're not going to be thinking about globalism versus nationalism. Mr. Medica, for what it's worth, was sounding the alarm back in January. Boeing car manufacturers are going to have a lot of trouble. At minimum, Trump will lose Michigan. Trump won't look ballsy on any outcome. The prudent and optical thing to do is to take extraordinary action to mitigate this viral epidemic. I think Trump wasted enormous political capital in 2017, following through with the Paul Ryan agenda, pushing through tax cuts instead of leveraging total control of Congress to secure the border, fulfill basic promises. Trump has also been resisting E-Verify to appease agricultural interests. Scott Adams and Kevin Michael Grace, a Trump Praetorian Guard. Most of Trump's posturing and trade agreements have been shaped by considerations about the Dow. Aside from judges, what has Trump accomplished? At least he moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. Considering the resistance to Trump, what more do you really think he could have accomplished? He started out by surrounding himself with lousy advisors and personnel. Pence says, I was hoping for martial law. I was hoping Trump would go on TV, put out a call for American men to join his private army. He need drastic corrective measures. Instead, he pushed Paul Ryan's agenda. Why on earth did Trump appoint Bolton as his national security advisor? Trump has done nothing to reshape the GOP and establish enduring infrastructure. His single term in office will be a blip. Trump hasn't even lifted a regulatory finger about social media censorship of conservatives. He's not a serious, competent person. So Donald Trump tweeted 8 hours ago, so last year 37,000 Americans died from the flu. Averages between 27,000 and 70,000 per year. Nothing is shut down. Life and economy go on. At this moment, there are 546 cases of coronavirus with 22 deaths. Think about that. Says there's no excuse for this. Why would the president tweet something like this under the circumstances? Trump is prioritizing the Dow over lives, refuses to allow Americans to disembark from a festering cruise ship because he likes the numbers where they are. Another friend says there's at least a 50% chance that all of this will be forgotten in 2 months. I don't see what's wrong with keeping coronavirus cases on a cruise ship. Cruises are a great way to call the population of shuffleboard players. Should Trump have advised against going on cruises weeks ago? Perhaps cruise passengers with coronavirus should have been transferred to a safe location off the cruiser liner. Infection rate was exploding because the cruise ship is not a proper substitute for quarantine. Trump resisted helping Americans because he didn't want to push the official case number up by 20. Trump overruled his own health officials on advising Americans to not take cruises. Flights. Will Trump be toying with people's lives if he continues to host rallies? More and more countries are banning religious services, such as Italy, Israel, Korea. The outbreak in South Korea arose from a Christian gathering. Concentrating people together in the midst of a major infectious disease crisis is worse than negligence. Trump is being put to the test here and he's failing. His erratic tweeting doesn't inspire confidence. And a friend said, Luke, you should hold an emergency alt-right Torah session, discuss the biblical plagues in the book of Exodus. Should Trump put a likeness of a serpent on a staff and instruct the people to look at it just as Moses did? Numbers 21. Moses prayed to God, who told Moses, make thee a fiery serpent, set it upon a pole. It shall come to pass that every one that is bitten when he sees it shall live. Okay, so pro-abortion feminists set themselves on fire in Mexico City today. I have to see this to believe it. Low IQ people throwing Molotov cocktails. They set themselves on fire. All right, what wisdom can we get from the book of Leviticus with regard to things like the coronavirus?
God, Yahweh is described as enthroned upon the cherubim. The ark then is said to serve as his footstool. So that's sort of the box that he would have rested his feet on. The ark itself contained the tablets of the covenant, and so it was a testament to the covenant between God and Israel. Interestingly, unlike most ancient sanctuaries, the Israelite sanctuary did not contain a statue of the deity. And that's, I think, evidence of the very strong aniconic tendency of Israelite religion. Nevertheless, God was believed to be present in the sanctuary, often in the form of a cloud that will descend to fill the tabernacle, particularly as it's assembled in a new encampment. And then God will descend down to, and the cloud will fill the tabernacle. So it is God's presence there that sanctifies, which simply means makes holy, makes sacred, to sanctify, to make holy, the tabernacle. And to understand this, we need to understand the priestly conception of holiness. Now, the Hebrew word holy has a root meaning of separate.
Okay, separation. That's what creates holiness. I think we need some more separation in our lives these days. So, April 27, 2018, Business Insider published this. Bill Gates thinks a coming disease could kill 30 million people within 6 months. Says we should prepare for it as we would for a war. Now, the White House today says coronavirus blindsided the world. Next deadly disease will cause a global pandemic, said Bill Gates back in 2018. We're not ready. An illness like the pandemic 1918 influenza could kill 30 million people within 6 months, Bill Gates said, adding the next disease might not even be a flu, but something we've never seen. The world should prepare for it as it does for war, Bill Gates said. Bill says he's usually the optimist in the room, reminding people that we're lifting children out of poverty and getting better at eliminating diseases like polio and malaria. But there's one area where the world isn't making much progress, and that's pandemic preparedness. Likelihood that such a disease will appear continues to rise. New pathogens emerge all the time as the world population increases and humanity encroaches on wild environments. Becoming easier and easier individual people or small groups to create weaponized diseases that could spread like wildfire around the globe. According to Bill Gates, a small non-state actor could build an even deadlier form of smallpox in a lab. And in our interconnected world, people are always hopping on planes, crossing from cities on one continent to those on another in a matter of hours. That's Bill Gates back in 2018. Predicting something very much like the coronavirus we have right now.
Separate. That which is holy is separate. It's withdrawn from common everyday use. In the priestly view, only God is intrinsically holy. Intrinsically holy. God can impart holiness to, he can sanctify persons and places and things when they're brought into a specific kind of relationship with him, a relationship that's best described as a relationship of ownership. What is holy is what is in God's realm, something that's separated to him. That which is outside God's realm is common, or the Hebrew word for common is sometimes translated by the English word profane. That has a negative connotation in English, but in fact it really doesn't bear that negative connotation. Profane simply means not holy, not sacred. We use it differently now. But the fact is that the common or profane state is the natural default state of most objects and things. This table is just profane, it's common, available for everyday use, not separated or marked off for special kind of treatment because it's holy. For a common object to become holy, you need a special act of dedication to God, an act of sanctification to transfer the thing to God or God's realm or God's service. So holiness entails necessarily separation in both its positive and negative aspects. It entails separation of an object to that which sanctifies it, which is God, and it involves separation from, in the form of safeguards against, anything that would threaten to remove its sanctity. So separation from that which threatens its sanctity. Holy things are holy because they are removed from the realm of the common by means of rules or safeguards that demarcate them as different and separate and determine that we use them differently. The preservation of holy status, therefore, depends on those rules and safeguards. Their observance protects the holy object from profanation, from being profaned, reverting from holy status back to common status. Now, it's evident from the schematic representation, or the way I've described the sanctuary, that holiness increases as you move deeper into the sanctuary. And the principle here is that holiness increases as proximity to God increases. The principle is graphically demonstrated in spatial terms. So in the biblical view, the area or the land outside the Israelite camp is just common profane land. The Israelite camp bears a certain degree of holiness. Then as you move in, the outer courtyard, the outer enclosure of the sanctuary bears a slightly higher degree of holiness.
So everything decent, all civilization, depends upon separation. Another word for separation, the Hebrew word is kadosh, is discrimination. Everything decent depends upon discrimination. If we want to have a decent society, if we want to have civilization, we have to separate ourselves from other people. We have to be very careful about who we let into our camp, who we let into our home, who we let into our nation. Everything precious requires covering. So the more covering you give to it, the more protection you give to it, the more you signify that it is precious.
It's accessible to Israelites who are pure. The sanctuary proper, which is in closer proximity to God, bears a still higher degree of holiness. It's accessible only to the priests, who are said to be the holy ones within Israel. And then the inner shrine is the holiest area. It's accessible only to the holiest member of the nation, the high priest. You have similar concentric circles of holiness characterizing the priestly conception of time. There are ordinary, common, profane days, work days. Then there are certain holy days, for example, the New Year or the Passover, holidays. That's where our word holiday comes from, holy days. And they are separated and demarcated from common time by special rules that mark them as different. Holier than these days is the Sabbath, which is demarcated by even further rules and observances. And the holiest day is Yom Kippur, known as the Sabbath of Sabbath. This day is separated from all other days by additional rules and observances in keeping with its profound holiness.
Okay, let me go to Jacob Milgram's commentary here on the book of Leviticus. It seems like a strange place I know to turn to for wisdom about things like the coronavirus, but there's great wisdom here. Basic premises of pagan religion are one, it is deities are themselves dependent on and influenced by a meta-divine realm. In other words, there's no one God running the universe. This realm spawns a multitude of malevolent, benevolent entities. And three, if humans can tap into this realm, they can acquire the magical power to coerce the gods to do their will. So this is essentially a magical worldview. You're not going to develop science with this kind of magical worldview. Science depends upon the idea that the universe is knowable and that it operates according to certain laws. So I've made a lot of dramatic changes to my sound. So let me know if you hear any difference in my sound quality compared to previous days. The eminent Assyriologist W.G. Lambert stated, "The impression is gained that everyday religion in Mesopotamia was dominated by fear of evil powers and black magic rather than a positive worship of the gods." So you have a place where it's dominated by fear of evil powers and of black magic, you're not going to develop science. The world was conceived to be full of evil demons who might cause trouble in any sphere of life. Again, that's not a type of culture that's going to develop science. They had attacked, the demons had attacked the right ritual should affect the cure. Humans as well as devils might work evil against a person by the black arts, and here too the appropriate ritual was required. So the Aborigines have this ritual where they point the bone, and such a devastating ritual supposedly that anyone who has this magical bone pointed at them is expected to drop dead. The priestly theology of the book of Leviticus negates these premises. It posits the existence of one supreme God who contends neither with a higher realm nor with competing gods. The world of demons is abolished. There is no struggle with autonomous foes because there are none. So in the Jewish worldview, there's no devil. There's nobody with independent power outside of God. With the demise of the demons, only one creature remains with demonic power. That's the human being. Endowed with free will, human power is greater than any attributed to humans by pagan societies. So we see in Italy, or we see with the Mark Wallace story, that one careless person or one selfish person, one evil person can just wreak havoc on hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people, transmitting things like coronavirus or HIV. Not only can the human being defy God, but in priestly imagery, he can drive God out of his sanctuary. In this respect, humans have replaced demons. So if we allow the level of impurity and filth to build up and to build and to build and to build, it just drives out decency. When a neighborhood goes downhill, there's a tipping point where decent people just leave. So in the story, what was the story between Abraham and God talking about Sodom? That God told Abraham he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham said, well, what if there are 50 decent people there? God says, okay, I won't destroy it if there are 50. Or what if there are 40, 30, 20? And then once the number gets below 10, Abraham stops even arguing. You need a certain number of decent people on a block in a community to keep it functioning. You don't have a high enough level of good, decent, hardworking, tax-paying, law-abiding citizens on a block, on a community, then the community just sinks into filth, into degradation, right? The pagans secured the perpetual aid of a benevolent deity by building him a temple residence in which the deity was housed, fed, and worshipped in exchange for protective care. The temple had to be inoculated by special rites, using magic drawn from the meta-divine realm against incursions by malevolent forces from the supernal and infernal world. So the Torah got rid of all this. There are no powers in the universe outside of God and outside of man. Priestly theologians make use of the same imagery, except that the demons now are replaced by human beings. Humans can drive God out of the sanctuary, but you don't have to use God here. Just bad people can drive decency out of a community. Bad people can drive health and prosperity and civilization out of a community by polluting it with their filth. And all that decent people can do, or all that the priests can do in the Levitical worldview, is to periodically purge the sanctuary of its impurities and influence the people to atone for their wrongs. Let's go back to Christine.
Holiness of persons, of objects, of time, and of space all converge on Yom Kippur, because it's only on this most holy day that the most holy person, high priest, enters the most holy of holies, the innermost shrine, and performs a ritual upon the most holy of objects, the mercy seat and ark itself, once a year. Well, now we need to consider the deep connection that exists between holiness and purity, because the two are not identical, despite massive amounts of scholarship that confuses this issue, thinks holy means pure, thinks common means impure, and it just doesn't. These are different binary oppositions. The two are not identical. To be holy means to belong to or to be in the realm of God. Things can't become holy and can't come into contact with the holy or the sacred if they are not first pure. Purity, which is the absence of impurity, is a prerequisite for access to the holy or for holy status. To be in a state of purity simply means that one is qualified to contact the sacred, to enter the sacred precincts, to handle sacred objects, and so on. To be in a state of impurity simply means that one is not qualified to contact the sacred. If you're impure at home and just minding your own business, it's no big deal. Only a problem if you decide you want to go to the sanctuary. So purity and impurity are states of qualification or disqualification for contact with sancta. The holy is by definition pure, by definition.
Right, so I think we need a little more purity in this country. And I'm thinking back to the 1976 film Taxi Driver, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro. It's about a mentally unstable Vietnam War vet, works as a nighttime taxi driver in New York City, where its decadent sleaze feeds his urges to violently lash out while saving a 12-year-old prostitute. There's a famous quote in this movie where Robert De Niro character Travis Bickle says, "Thank God for the rain. Just helped wash away the garbage and trash off the sidewalks. All the animals come out at night, the whores, the skunk pussies, the buggers, the queens, the fairies, the dopers, the junkies, the sick, the venal. Someday a real rain will come and wash all this scum off the streets. I go all over. I take people to the Bronx, Brooklyn. I take them to Harlem. I don't care. Don't make no difference to me. It does to some. Some won't even take spooks. Don't make no difference to me. Each night when I return the cab to the garage, I have to clean the cum off the back seat. Some nights I clean off the blood." So he's predicting someday a rain is going to come, just going to wash all the scum. It's kind of a Leviticus.
Only that which is free of impurity can contact the holy. If an impure object, and you see here these overlapping pairs, which are also on your handout. If you could imagine the lower pair sort of being plonked down on top of this pair, that will give you an idea of what we're trying to convey with this image. Okay? Things are either holy or common, but if they're holy, they must be pure. Common objects can be pure or impure. It just depends whether or not they've been in contact with a source of impurity or not. Right? But notice that the holy and the impure are never conjoined. If an impure object comes in contact with a holy object, then the holy object is immediately defiled. It's immediately rendered impure. The word defiled means to take on some.
Right. So maintaining decency or purity or holiness in your life takes constant effort. You have to constantly cleanse, clean. You have to constantly put up boundaries. You have to constantly discriminate. You have to be careful about the type of people you allow into your home, into your life, into your office, into your business, into your social circle, into your synagogue or church. Because to maintain any decency, any holiness, any sense of what is good and right and just and godly, you have to practice intense discrimination against that which is filthy and slovenly, careless, and diseased. I go back to Jacob Milgram here. So ancient Israel's thoroughgoing evisceration of the demonic transformed concept of purity. In Israel, impurity was harmless, retained potency only with regard to sacred space. Laypersons, but not priests, might contract impurity with impunity. They must not, however, delay their purificatory rites lest their impurity affect the sanctuary. So we go out in the world and we earn a living, we do business, we're going to constantly come into contact with the pure. So we have to constantly take steps to wash all the filth off us, wash the filth out of our minds, off our skin, out of our lives, out of our thinking. Just watching TV frequently, it just clogs up the mind, or just poor choices in the music you listen to. Just start just feeling dirty, right? There's certain TV shows that you watch, you just feel disgusting. The retention of impurity is dynamic, but not demonic power in regard to sanctum served a theological function. Sanctuary symbolized the presence of God. Impurity represented the wrongdoing of persons. Persons unremittingly polluted the sanctuary. They forced God out of his sanctuary, out of their lives. Then their own lives came to risk. So the center of traditional Judaism is not the synagogue. It's the home. Okay, so the home has really taken the place of the holy temple in the traditional way of life. And so you have to put up boundaries and you have to engage in constant cleansing to maintain the purity, the sanctity, and holiness of your home. You just can't unremittingly pollute it. Priestly texts on scale disease and chronic genital flows give ample witness to the priestly polemic against the idea that physical impurity arises from the activity of demons. Must be either exorcised or appeased. So exorcism is more of a thing in parts of Roman Catholicism. It's very rarely a Jewish thing. Purification is neither healing nor magic. The afflicted person undergoes purification only after being cured. Ablutions, cleansing, the wordless rites, they are unaccompanied by incantation or gesticulation, which those things, incantation or the special gestures, those are the quintessential ingredients in pagan healing rites. So the adjective is purified, not cured. The verb cure never appears in the ritual. A moldy garment or a fungus home does not reflect on the owner. The owner brings no sacrifice and performs no rite that might indicate culpability. Even though the scale disease person does bring sacrifices for possible wrongdoing, the only determinable wrong is that the owner's impurity has polluted the sanctuary. And this person who's got chronic genital flux, it is the discharge that contaminates, not the person. Hence, objects that are underneath such a person, such as a bed, a seat, or a saddle, considered impure. Mesopotamia, however, one's table and cup transmit impurity. The difference is that in Israel, the afflicted man does not contaminate by touch as long as he washes his hands. As a result, he was not banished or isolated, but was allowed to remain at home. Same concessions were extended to the menstruant, who was otherwise universally ostracized. She too defiled only that which was beneath her. the Torah perspective. Touching such objects, however, incurred greater impurity than touching her directly. So the primary priestly objective here is to root out the prevalent notion that the menstruating woman was possessed by demonic powers. The top example of the evisceration of the demonic from ancient Israel's system is provided by Azazel. Although Azazel seems to be in the name of a demon, the goat sent to him is not a sacrifice requiring slaughter and blood, nor does it have the effect of a sacrifice in providing purification, expiation, and the like. The goat is simply the symbolic vehicle for dispatching Israel's sins to the wilderness. So Christians have this notion that there's no forgiveness of sin without blood. That's simply not true, just no basis for this in ancient Israel's sacrificial system. The purification of the corpse-contaminated person with the lustral ashes of the red cow can also claim pride of place among Israel's victories over pagan beliefs. The hitherto demonic impurity of the corpse is being revitalized, first by denying its autonomous power to pollute the sanctuary, and then by denying that the corpse-contaminated person must be banished from his community during his purification period. Israel's battle against demons was not won in one stroke. Scripture indicates it was a gradual process. The ancient Israel system attests a progressive reduction of contagious impurity in three primary human sources: scale disease, pathological flux, and corpse contamination. The earliest priestly tradition calls for their banishment, as the presence of God is coextensive with the entire camp. Later, strata show that banishment is prescribed only for scale disease. Genital flux and corpse contamination permit their bearers to remain at home, indicates that the divine presence is not viewed as confined just to the sanctuary. Henceforth, in P, the priestly code, the only fear evoked by impurity is its potential impact on the sanctuary. And then the H, the holiness code in the book of Leviticus and Numbers, extends God's presence over the entire land of Israel. The driving force behind this impurity reduction is Israel's monotheism. The impure still adheres in things, but it is spread only under special conditions. But impurity springs to life, resumes its virulent character only in regard to the sphere of the sacred. These impurities are not to be confused with evils. Back to Christine Hayes from
form of ritual impurity. And it loses its holy status automatically. So it becomes both impure and profane. To be restored, then, you're going to have two things happening. First of all, it's got to be purified. You've got to get rid of the ritual impurity. There'll have to be some ritual procedure that purges the impurity. So once you've done that, you've made it pure, but it's still common, profane. So it has to, if it's to be made holy again, it has to be rededicated or given over to God again, re-sanctified, maybe a little holy anointing oil poured on it. That's one means of sanctification, simply handing it over to God, elevating it.
And Mark Krikorian, the anti-immigration activist, tweets, over the last several days, Iran has pushed several reports claiming that Zionists were behind the coronavirus. How long till Nick Fuentes picks up on this one? And Brett Baer asks Bernie Sanders, if you had to, would you close down the borders to deal with the coronavirus? And Bernie Sanders says, no, we have a president who has propagated a xenophobic anti-immigrant sentiment from before he was elected.
Did you close down the border?
No. I mean, what you don't want to do right now, we have a president who has propagated xenophobic anti-immigrant sentiment from before he was elected.
If you had
And the White House says, thanks to early decisive action, risk to the American public of contracting coronavirus remains
unprecedented action that President Trump had the opportunity to brief the president today on a broad range of issues. And once again, because of the unprecedented action that President Trump took in January, suspending all travel from China, establishing travel advisories for portions of South Korea and Italy, establishing screening of all direct flights, all passengers from all airports, Italy and South Korea. We have bought a considerable amount of time, according to all the health experts, to deal with the coronavirus here in the United States. In fact, as I stand before you today, The risk of contracting the coronavirus to the American public remains low, and the risk of serious disease among the American public also remains low.
Okay, back to Jacob Milgram here on Leviticus. Similar gradation in the contagion of holiness is exhibited in Scripture. The earliest traditions of the Bible, the sanctums communicate holiness to persons. So you're simply in a holy place, you receive holiness. The sanctuary's inner sanctums more powerfully so, directly by sight or indirectly by touch, even when the contact is accidental. According to the early narratives, this power can be deadly. So we've got stories in Samuel and Exodus about the divine fire and how it can consume people. The priestly strata major changes occurred. This fatal power is restricted to the rare moment in which the tabernacle is dismantled. Otherwise, the sanctums can no longer infect persons even if touched. So this drastic reduction in the contagious power of the sanctums was not accepted by all priestly schools. Prophet Ezekiel holds out the older view that sanctums are contagious to persons. Text is silent concerning the motivation behind this priestly reform. Undoubtedly, the priests were disturbed by the superstitious fears of the fatal power of the sanctums might keep the masses away from the sanctuary. On the contrary, they taught the people that God's holiness stood for the forces of life, that only when approached in an authorized way would it bring death. I was just thinking about one of my favorite verses in the Torah is God says to the people of Israel, I put before you this day a choice between life and death. So what are some ways that we can choose life or choose death when we participate in social media? We participate in YouTube live streams. So here are some choices in social media to me that seem to promote life. You develop habits and you form neural pathways that serve you in life. Oh man, someone's ringing my doorbell. Thanks.
Towards God is another way of re-sanctifying something, but there has to be two steps, a purification and then a sanctification to make it holy again. Increased access to the holy requires an increased degree of purity, the connection between holiness and purity. So the purity that's required of a priest who has access to the sanctuary proper is higher than that of an Israelite who has access to the outer courtyard only. The purity required of the high priest is even greater. So to be pure, one must separate oneself from sources of impurity. What are these sources of impurity? I had a chance to look at the reading material because I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. Jonathan Klawans has been the most vocal proponent of the claim that biblical texts speak of two distinct types of impurity, ritual impurity and moral impurity.
So, Jewish tradition on the eve of Purim is that we give gifts, shalach manot. So it's we've got some wine here. We've got all sorts of goodies. So all these gift baskets, you give them to friends. You get a card with all the people who are sending this to you. That's also a good money maker for synagogues. So shalach manot is the Hebrew term for the gifts that you're supposed to give each other just before Purim. All right.
I have up here. You've read this short article he has in the Jewish Study Bible, but he's also written about this at great length in other places. And according to Klawans and others, ritual impurity arises from physical substances and states which are not in themselves sinful. There's no intimate connection with sin when we're talking about ritual impurity. In fact, a lot of ritual impurity is unavoidable and sometimes even obligatory, right? Sexual contact makes one ritually impure, and yet God commands humans to be fruitful and multiply. Burying the dead makes one ritually impure, but God commands proper care of the dead. So there's nothing inherently sinful about contracting ritual impurity. Ritual impurity, which is generally permitted, is distinguished by the characteristics I've quickly jotted down here. It's contagious, that is, it's transferred to other persons or objects, depending on how receptive they are, perhaps by physical touch, perhaps in the case of severe impurity, by sharing an enclosed space, by being together under an overhanging roof, tent. Ritual impurity is also impermanent. It can be removed or reduced through rituals of ablutions or just the passage of time or other sorts of ritual observances. Ritual impurity also defiles or renders impure sancta, and so it has to be kept separate from sancta. In very severe cases, it can even defile some common objects, and in those cases, the source of impurity might have to be isolated or excluded if necessary.
Yeah, we need some more social isolation and exclusion. Keep this country safe and beat back this virus. Emmanuel tweets, amazing nationwide policies about how to deal with this pandemic in the U.S. Every person for himself. There should be a mobilization for tests, medicines, food delivery, hospital beds, ICUs. Said there's an attitude, you can't build a hospital in 10 days, so let's do nothing. And David Pinson responds, banning fans from sporting events, canceling political rallies, closing schools, mandatory work from home where practical, banning flights between affected cities, one patron per table at restaurants, encouraging people to order in. Why not just try that for a month?
Now, the concept of ritual impurity was a central and integral feature of most, if not all, ancient religions. And the biblical laws of purity and impurity strongly resemble those of other ancient Near Eastern cultures, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, even Hittite culture. And certainly, there are ancient Near Eastern and Canaanite roots for Israelite purity practices. But the system of ritual purity and impurity that is crafted in the priestly writings of the Hebrew Bible represents an attempt to monotheize.
Okay, I want to get back to my theme. How do you choose between life and death? On social media, love the Torah statement. I put before you this day a choice between life and death. Choose life. So perhaps the most famous Jewish expression is l'chaim, means to life. So here are some choices in social media that promote life. You develop habits, you form neural pathways in how you participate, say, in a YouTube chat that serve you in life rather than habits and neural pathways that hurt you in life. Would you be proud to see your social media posts featured on the front page of the New York Times? You use social media to build connections, to develop friendships, to go into business with people, or to date people with whom you share values. Feel good afterwards, after what you've participated in. You display an accurate sense of your own importance. You want to contribute and to help people. You share vulnerability judiciously. You strive to be accurate. Your social media use meshes with other parts of your life. Your social media use promotes coherence in your life. What you share works through all the different parts of your life. You exercise care and discretion. You help people. You lift up people. You seek win-win solutions where possible. Your self-esteem does not depend on the number of people who retweet you or like you. You don't sacrifice your values to pursue higher ratings, higher engagement. You don't worry about certain people in your life reading it, and your use helps you to feel elevated and connected to others. Social media choices that promote death. You develop habits and you form neural pathways that hurt you in life. So if you say hateful, nasty things online, your social media use, you're going to take those same habits into your daily life. You'd hate to see your social media posts on the front page of the New York Times. You probably shouldn't make them. If your use of social media is destroying your friendships, if you're pissing off people so they want to hunt you down in real life and hurt you, then you're making choices that promote death. If you feel lousy afterward, you lack an accurate sense of your own importance. If your use is to primarily emphasize how wonderful and special you are, and that you are not subject to the ordinary rules of human relationships, that's going to hurt your life. If your social media use is primarily about tearing people down, if you pursue feuds, if you're reckless, if you're unnecessarily morbid, social media use threatens the rest of your life. It promotes splitting up of your life into incompatible parts. You hurt people if you're morbid. You seek I win, you lose engagement. If your self-esteem depends on how many likes you get or how many viewers you get, you violate your own moral code to pursue higher social media ratings. And if you're worried about the wrong people read your social media posts, or if your use of social media makes you feel degraded and disconnected, right? So here's how not to do social media.
Like a fucking 100 times. I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me. We're gonna fucking ritualistically humiliate them. I am coming back here every fucking weekend if I have to. Like, this is never over. I win. They fucking lose. That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking kites. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are gonna destroy this fucking town.
Okay, that's an approach to social media that does not work. Back to Rabbi Jacob Milgram, his commentary here on the book of Leviticus. Contact with the sacred space of the temple would be fatal to the encroacher, that is, the non-priest who dared officiate with the priests, but not to the Israelites who worship God in their midst. Yeah, so there are all sorts of spaces that you should not go to if it's inappropriate for you to be there, right? We all need limits. We all need to know where it's okay for us to step and not okay, and we need to enforce these boundaries or limits with other people as well so that we can preserve our health, preserve our civilization. There's also a more realistic motivation, the anarchic institution of altar assignment, precisely because the altar sanctified those who touched it, thereby automatically gave them asylum, regardless of whether they were murderers, bandits, rapists, or other criminals. So there is a sentiment in the Torah that if you simply grab hold of the altar, you are protected. But the majority position in the Torah is that when it comes to criminals, when it comes to murderers, you can rip them away from the very center of the sanctuary. By taking the radical step of declaring that the sancta, particularly the altar, were no longer contagious to persons, the priests ended once and for all the institution of altar asylum. So it used to be that if you're a bad guy but you got hold of the altar, you had a form of asylum. In this matter, they were undoubtedly abetted by the king and his bureaucracy, earnestly wanted to terminate the veto power of the sanctuary of their jurisdiction. So all the rituals of Leviticus make sense only as part of an overall symbolic system. Only a few types of scale disease, for example, many clearly non-contagious, were declared impure. Yet to judge by the plethora of ancient Mesopotamian texts dealing with the diagnosis and treatment of virulent disease, it's fair to assume that Israel knew them as well, did not classify them as impure. Same situation obtains with genital discharges. Why are secretions from other orifices of the body not impure, such as mucus, perspiration, and urine and feces? Why are there only these three sources of impurity in the Levitical worldview: corpses, carcasses, scale disease, and genital discharges? Must be a comprehensive theory that can explain all of these cases. Moreover, because the phenomena declared impure are the precipitates of a filtering process initiated by the priest, the filter must be their invention. Impurity laws form a system governed by a priestly rationale. This rationale comes to light once it is perceived that there is a common denominator, the three above-mentioned sources of impurity, that is death. So each day we have to choose between life and death, and the Torah provides a ritualized system for encouraging us to choose life.
Monotheize Israelite purity practices and to create a system that differentiated Israel from her close neighbors. So, for example, impurity was often connected with belief in evil spirits and impure demons. It's quite possible that Israel's purification rituals may have originated and even long endured as rituals of exorcism that expelled a demon or who was believed to be causing the affliction in question. That may be their origin and source, but in the priestly writings, impurity is generally divorced from any association with evil spirits. Some scholars theorize that the ritual purity system reflects an original concern with health or hygiene, but this isn't very convincing. Only one set of diseases is said to generate ritual impurity.
Okay, so there is more to life than health, but sensitizing yourself to impurity or filth, I'd have to think that overall it's a very healthy a suit. So Hillary Sargent has throwing a bead on various members of the alt-right. Now she's going after Tom Kaczynski, who was on this show a couple of years ago. Writes, from Swarthmore to fired for being a white nationalist when he was a city manager who maxed out his credit cards to buy canned food, wrote a book recommended raiding canned food pantries to stock up in Maine, the Tom Kaczynski story. Tom Kaczynski, I'm literally at the cutting edge of the far right, where we emerged was the need for a new center, a truth we can affirm to unite us lest we descend into nothingness. That's why so many of us are actually embracing the traditional faith. Why not seek the highest truth? There are limits to where politics will take the heart and mind. We need to be better people before we can honestly seek better outcomes. That's how I went from Swarthmore to exile in rural Maine. At least it's a gilded cage and I love nature. Let's see what's tracking the Chris Cantwell case. Telegram chat on Tom Kaczynski has descended into darkness, varying between examining whether or not Tom should emerge from self-quarantine to buy more rice or stay inside spewing disinformation to people who are contemplating whether they can buy more ammo even if they don't actually own a gun. Oh, and lots of discussion of bankers. Just waiting for Tom to tell them all about his plan to be king of an ethno-state. And Boston has apparently canceled its St. Patrick's Day parade. University of Florida and Princeton recommending their professors make their classes online.
In iron lungs. I was growing up, we got the polio vaccine for free and nobody asked how you pay for it because what they saw were children in iron lungs that were going to be damaged forever. How insane and cruel is it to suggest that we have to figure out how to pay for it when we can actually go to war and not ask one question, but to prevent this kind of a disease, we have to say, how can we pay for it? That, I'm sorry.
Cost of not paying for the vaccine is going to be orders of magnitude much more expensive.
I was growing up.
Qasim Rashid tweets, last week a conservative constituent sent me a deeply hurtful anti-Muslim tweet. I replied by donating to his GoFundMe to help cover his crushing medical debt. He wrote me a thoughtful and compassionate apology and asked me to visit him. Today I met my new friend. Okay. There's a heartwarming story. How many news organizations writing about companies letting workers telecommute are also encouraging their own employees to stay home? You need an incentive, a financial incentive for pharmaceuticals to be brought to market. It's expensive. So Hillary says, I used to do competitive intelligence for pharmaceuticals and vaccine development. Basically, the drugs you take to ameliorate the deadly symptoms of cancer treatment. Don't make big money curing diseases that affect poor people as much, if not more, if they affect the wealthy. Infectious diseases are the neglected stepchild of pharma. Don't invest in curing infectious diseases. They spread. Sometimes they spread only in third world countries, sometimes not. But we can invest more in vaccines as a result of this. Okay, back to Christine.
And many substances that are widely considered unhygienic by most cultures. For example, human and animal excrement. These are not sources of ritual impurity to Israel's priests. So Klawans is among those who insist that any effort to understand the purpose and the meaning of Israelite purity practices as schematized by the monotheizing priestly writers in Leviticus 12 through 16. And again, whether actual Israelite Judeans did this or understood things this way, we'll never know. But to understand the schematization of the monotheizing schematization of Israel's purity practices, we would do better to ignore questions of origins and to attend to the larger symbolism of impurity and holiness in these writings. In particular, we need to try to understand the antithetical relationship between impurity and holiness. The two are opposites. They are opposed and antagonistic towards one another. So Klawan points out, as you know, that there are three main sources of impurity in P. First of all, corpses and certain carcasses are a source of ritual impurity. Sara'at, which is this, we translate it scale disease. It's been called leprosy. It's definitely not leprosy. People who know such things.
Back to Hillary Sargent's Twitter here. Says white nationalist Tom Kaczynski is encouraging people to raid food banks to add to their 3 months plus of stored food.
Have read the details in the biblical text, and it's not what is truly known as leprosy. But it's some sort of skin disease, flaking skin disease, or other sorts of oils and skin states that seem to be associated, at least in the Israelite mind, with decomposition and death. We have a couple of passages, one in the book of Numbers, one in the book of Job, which describe this condition in a way that identifies it with death. An aborted fetus is often described as looking like it has this condition, for example.
Tom Kaczynski writes, it's a sensitive and dangerous subject. He's endorsing here scavenging from the dead if need supplies. The opportunity will exist as this advances to gain access to supplies from those who are less fortunate, less well prepared. Provided you disinfect all surfaces, keep items in a quarantine area for a few days until their safety can be verified. You may find scavenging will meet some of your food needs, especially if you have patients in an urban area. Do not seek to steal that which others have preserved, but if no supplies will not be used, do not be shy about augmenting your own. Tom Kaczynski is turned into Mr. Coronavirus Prepper.
Not often, happens once in the book of Job. But the point is there's a connection between this condition, the skin condition and its decomposition and death. The third source of ritual impurity would be genital discharges, both normal and diseased. So Klawan notes in the article you read that the physical substances and states that are labeled impure and are therefore designated as antithetical to the realm of holiness are states that are associated with death on the one hand and procreation on the other. Why should this be? The priestly conception of God, you will recall, is of an immortal and asexual being. Think back to the first creation story, which is the priestly creation story.
You're reading a doctor here, Abra Karan. The most critical systems responses for controlling coronavirus as it spreads will be making sure that young, healthy patients do not go to emergency rooms if they have mild symptoms. They should call their doctors to discuss and likely self-isolate. Deaths have been most common among elderly, those with other medical comorbidities. These people are likely to be in our emergency rooms. Some of them won't be infected with coronavirus. We need to minimize unnecessary exposures to this vulnerable group. Do not have the hospital capacity. 15 to 20% of corona cases require hospitalizations. And the studies we're seeing from the major studies is that 15 to 25% of those who get the coronavirus will require ICU, intensive care unit. Hospital capacity needs to be reserved for those who really need it. Sure, you can easily reach a doctor, nurse, healthcare provider over the phone. Many people do not have primary care providers. Large-scale self-isolation will have ripple effects as it pushes people out of work for a significant amount of time. Large economic implications of this could have major consequences. Departments of Public Health need to create call-in lines by which people can call a number immediately connected to a doctor, nurse, or other healthcare professional to get screened.
To enter the realm of the holy, in which there is neither death nor procreation, requires a separation from death and procreation. It is association with death and sexuality that renders one impure and disqualifies one from entering the holy sanctuary. That is not to say that one shouldn't deal with death or sexuality in the ordinary course of life. On the contrary, God explicitly commands humans to be fruitful and multiply, and he does that in the peace source, right, in Genesis 1. He commands proper care of the dead, and he also does that in the peace source. It simply means that one cannot enter the holy sanctuary, God's realm, when impure through contact with death or sexuality. According to Klawan's, ritual purification involved separation from those aspects of humanity, death and sex, that are least godlike.
So I think ancient Israel's priests are the only priests of which I'm aware who are forbidden from attending to the dead. So that's just part of Judaism's emphasis on life rather than death, that its priests have to concern themselves entirely with the living, not with the dead. A priest may not enter, for example, a cemetery. Looking here at Jacob Milgram's commentary on the book of Leviticus. Genital discharge from the male is semen, and from the female blood. They both represent the life force, so their loss represents death. This case of scale disease also becomes comprehensible with the realization that the priestly legislators have not focused on disease per se, but only on the appearance of disease. So that's why religious people in particular, but also traditional people in general, just wise people in general, they try to stay away from even the appearance of wrongdoing. Moldy fabrics and fungus houses singled out, not because they are struck with scale disease, but because they give that appearance. So appearances matter. So too, the few varieties of scale disease affecting the human body, their appearance is that of approaching death. When Miriam is stricken with scale disease, Moses prays, "Let her not be like a corpse." So the wasting of the human body, common characteristic of the highly visible, biblically pure scale disease, symbolizes the death process as much as the loss of vaginal blood and semen. So it's part of an overall ritualistic system, reminding ancient Israel to choose life rather than death. We need such a system today, for example, with regard to social media. The dietary laws, kashrut, Judaism, are next to these laws, and they're also governed by similar criteria. Shad queuing and split hooves, which are equally arbitrary and meaningless in themselves, but they serve a larger purpose. This purpose can be deduced from the explicit assumption of relevant texts that animal life is inviolable, except for a few edible animals, provided they are slaughtered properly, painlessly, and their blood, for example, their life, is drained, thereby returned to God. The rationale of holiness, the equation of blood and life, first articulated in the Holiness Code in Leviticus, but they were also adumbrated in the Priestly Code in Genesis chapter 9, verse 4. So because impurity on the one hand, holiness on the other hand are antonyms, they're opposites. The identification of impurity with death must mean that holiness stands for life. So when you feel disgusted because you've been binging on porn, feel dirty, filthy, that's choosing a form of death for the soul. No wonder that reddish substances, the surrogates of blood, among the ingredients of the purificatory rites for scale disease and corpse-contaminated persons. They symbolize the victory of the forces of life over death. The blood of the purification offering symbolically purges the sanctuary by symbolically absorbing its impurities for the victory for life over death. The priest is commanded to eat the flesh of the purification offering, and the high priest dispatches the sanctuary's impurities together with the people's sins. In neither case is the priest affected. So the holiness life has triumphed over impurity. Death, impurity does not pollute the priest as long as he serves God in the sanctuary. That's similar to the 12-step perspective that you can go anywhere that you have a good reason for going. You don't have to cower from or triggers. Like worrying about triggers for your addiction is something that happens more in very early recovery. Once you have substantive recovery, you can go anywhere if you have a good reason for going. As long here in Torah perspective, impurity does not pollute as long as you serve God. Israel, as long as it serves God by obeying his commandments, can overcome the forces of impurity and death. So that's why you had Muslim terrorists like Hamas who said the Jews love life, but we we Muslim terrorists, we love death. Because the quintessential source of holiness resides with God, Israel is enjoined to control the occurrence of impurity, filth, disgustingness in your life, lest it impinge on the divine realm. So you access God very differently in a clean room as opposed to a filthy room, in a clean life as opposed to a filthy life. If you have arrayed your belongings, your musical choices, your social media choices in a way that is constructive, you'll find it much easier to get access to God, and then your intuition will become a text message from God. And when you're torn between doing two different things, you can ask God, hey, if plan A is your will, increase my desire for it. So you can tune into the text messages you get from God, and you can become steadily more attuned to God, so that as you reach out to God, God reaches out to you. If you construct your life in a holy way. But if you fill your life with filth, with nonsense, with impurity, with pointlessness, with degradation, then you've got all this muck that is going to get in the way of your pure access to your higher power. Forces pitted against each other in a cosmic struggle are no longer the benevolent demonic deities who populate the mythologies of Israel's neighbors, but the forces of life and death set loose by persons themselves through their obedience to or defiance of God's commandments. So you can arrange your house, your apartment, your room in a way that enables you to access the divine. You can arrange your musical choices, your entertainment choices, your reading choices, your work choices, your friend choices, your recreational choices in a way that make it easier for you to access God or not. Despite all the changes manifested in the evolution of Israel's impurity laws, the objective remains the same: to sever impurity from the demonic and to reinterpret it as a symbolic system, reminding Israel of the divine imperative to reject death and to choose life. So the more friends you have, the deeper your friendships, the more you contribute to the lives of other people, the more reason you will have to go on living at your best, so that you can be of greater service to others. But if nobody's depending on you, if you're not important to other people, if you don't have strong ties, then your connection to life will get attenuated and you'll be more likely to make self-destructive choices. But on the other hand, if you're enmeshed, if you're connected with good people and you're living your mission and you see what your purpose is and you're going towards it and you're contributing to your community, then you'll have all sorts of reasons to be the best.
To enter God's realm requires imitation of God, or imitatio Dei. And I put up here, imitatio Dei, imitation of God. And Klawans further argues that the concept of imitatio Dei also explains the practice of sacrifice, which on the face of it contradicts the idea that you must avoid death in connection with the holy, right? Because sacrifice entails killing right in the sanctuary, killing of animals right in the sanctuary. So Klawans argues, and I quote,
so one aspect of choosing life is you respect people who carry guns, particularly you respect legally constituted authority, but anyone who's carrying a gun, you should be very careful about how you speak to them. So you should obviously raise your children to speak to the police with great respect.
Look at them. I want all y'all back. All these police officers think I was stealing. Look at them. Look at them. Look how dumb he look. Look at them. I want all y'all badge number too. I swear to God, I'm not playing. Look at them. Look how dumb they look. How dumb you look. How dumb you feel. I ain't had nothing on me, did I? Crazy. Feeling so stupid. Look at him. Look at him. Look at him, man. I thought I was stealing. Look at this man. Over here looking like the man off of, bro, what? Stop playing with me, bro. They thought I was stealing. Now they feeling stupid, nigga, because they caught D'Anthony with all this stuff, nigga. I ain't caught me with nothing, nigga. I ain't had nothing. I want your badge number. What's your badge number? Jamin. Yup. Bro, hey, can I get your badge number? Huh? No, can I? Bro, don't put your hands. Hey, bro, don't put your hands on me, bro. Look, y'all see it, right? Don't put your hands on me. Bro, can you get your hands off me, bro?
Are you gonna stand up again?
No, I ain't gonna stand up. Get your hands off me. I want your badge number, too. And my mom, I want your badge number. I want your badge number, because your badge number is about ready to pop off your fat ass. I want every one of y'all badge number. I promise you, I want every single one of y'all badge number. Y'all niggas think out, bro. Ooh, y'all so lucky. And, bro, if y'all took these badges off, I'll fire on all you niggas right now, bro. Look.
Okay, that's not a smart way to talk to people who have guns. Right, the emergence of germ theory in the 19th century was a paradigm shift for the understanding of the causes of disease and infection. So they realized that doctors who washed their hands before helping women give birth, they had much lower rates of death. So before this turning point, many cultures were aware that diseases can be contagious and came up with ways to avoid it. Reading here from essay by Dr. Yitzhak Better. It's really professor. The earliest unambiguous evidence that people are aware of contagion can be found in old Babylonian letters from the Syrian city Amari from 4,000 years ago. These letters document illnesses and epidemics that assailed the kingdom. A letter from Queen to the last king related that her infected servant was placed in an isolated dwelling where she would eat her meals separately from the rest of the palace servants. No one will approach her bed or a chair. King expresses concern regarding another infected servant who has been freely interacting with the personnel. Now command that no one will drink from a cup that she drinks from, nor sit in a chair in which she sits, nor sleep on a bed in which she sleeps. The ancients did not know why some diseases were contagious, why some illnesses were contagious. They entertained multiple possibilities regarding the causes of disease, including demonic attack, witchcraft, divine anger, and curses. The ancient Sherpu incantations seek to treat a severely ill person by addressing numerous possible causes, including contact with a cursed or a tamu person, curse of talking to an accursed man, the curse of eating an accursed man's food, the curse of drinking an accursed man's water, the curse of drinking an accursed man's leftovers. So some of these texts combine the fear of curse with elements of physical contact, food, water, while others are just about talking. So these ancient Near East texts refer to plague as a devouring by the god, or the gods placing the hand or touching the affected region, implying that they understand the cause to be divine. At the same time, these letters describe responses to these plagues that range from containing individual cases through quarantine to mass exodus from affected cities. And if the ultimate cause of an illness was the divine touch, the effects of infectious illnesses could be transferred from person to person. So why did no one want to go to Hillary Clinton's rallies in the summer and fall of the 2016 election? Because she looked like she was dying. People naturally shy away from those who look like they are dying. Like the ancient Mesopotamian sources, the Bible refers to mass afflictions and manifestations of the hand of God. So I was bedridden for 6 years during my 20s. And people my age, they definitely shied away. Very disturbing for them. So these manifestations for the hand of God can mean touched or struck or afflicted by God. This is what happened to the Pharaoh after he took Abraham's wife Sarai. The God struck Pharaoh and his household with mighty plague on account of Sarai, the wife of Abraham. So a cynic might say that Abraham's wife Sarai gave Pharaoh the clap. The derivatives of this verse include the verbal form used to describe God afflicting people and lands with disease. The verbal root is also used in noun form to describe infectious diseases, especially the skin disease Zarat. Leviticus says when a person has Zarat shall be reported to the priest. This ambiguity between the touch of God's divine punishment and interpersonal contagion reflects the fundamental perception that external factors bring about disease and cause it to spread, even if it isn't the same external factor doing both. So still today, when people get sick or have misfortune, sometimes people think about that as a manifestation of the hand of God. Disease may start with a person being struck by a deity, but only once a person contracts the disease, it can be spread from that person to others. The touch, whether by God or a person, is the catalyst. Touch. The English word contagion means touched with, reflects an intuition shared by ancient Mesopotamian, biblical, Latin, Greek authors. Understood contagion. British medical historian Vivian Nutton writes about Greek and Latin evidence. In all this, it is perhaps foolish to seek to distinguish between degrees of propriety in the application of a metaphor, or to differentiate medical from non-medical. Many of those who talked of the contagion of illness or of heresy not have been able to explain in what way they thought the common touch worked, and few, if any, have restricted the touch to the mere physical person-to-person transmission of a noxious substance. What mattered was the consequence of the sharing of the disease rather than the act of touching itself. The sphere of contagion is a key concern in determining whether a person is unclean. Repeated close association in the book of Leviticus makes sense. This disease, Sarat, more than any other, was treated as contagious. This is almost certainly the reason why lepers were banished from the camp. Leviticus chapter 13, verse 45, as one bearing Sarat, his clothes shall be rent, his head shall be left bare, he'll cover over his upper lip, and he shall call out, unclean, unclean. Shall be unclean as long as the disease is on him. Being unclean, he shall dwell apart. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. See this narrative again of the 4 lepers banned from the city in 2 Kings chapter 7. Again, it's a reflection of a fear contagion. The photo here of wretched lepers outside Jerusalem, 1896. Spreading of disease is not only about person to person, but even within one person. Think of the English term infection. It can be used to describe the multiplication of bacteria within a person whose wound got infected. Interpersonal spread of disease, what we call infectious disease. Key characteristic of this is its spreading. Leviticus chapter 13, 6. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him again. If the affliction has faded and does not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. If there's a rash, he shall wash his clothes and he shall be clean. If the rash should spread on the skin after he has presented himself to the priest, being pronounced clean, he shall present himself again. The priest sees that the rash has spread further, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. Sarah. But the presence or absence of spreading is what determines whether or not the condition is diagnosed as impure. So it's the trajectory. Matters become tricky when we attempt to understand the term Sarat or Tumah. So I remember when I was asked to leave one synagogue because I had been writing on the porn industry, the rabbi got a face like this and says it's tameh, it's impure. So tameh, impure, can be applied to conditions we would consider onus, such as leprosy and gonorrhea, as well as conditions we would consider natural, such as menstrual bleeding or ejaculation. Types of pollution associated with disease were treated seriously. Biblical scholars have often underestimated the relationship between pollution and infectious disease, viewing it as an exclusively religious phenomenon. However, cross-cultural examples, including those from the ancient Near East, show that the terminology of impurity is frequently used to describe the symptoms of disease. Terms such as impure and pure are not confined to the cultic domain. They appear regularly in the context of disease and healing. 20th century research, a sharp dichotomy can be found between materialistic explanations of impurity, relating it to hygiene. Critics, those attempts to appeal to symbolic interpretations. The purity and impurity represent forces of life and death. Leviticus 13 requires the priest to determine whether the person should be diagnosed with Sarat, scale disease. This diagnosis has far-reaching legal and ritual ramifications. If they are pronounced infected, they are sent outside the camp. So there are 2 distinct senses. Senses of the word Sarat. First designates the cessation of flow, enabling the sufferer to begin the 7-day process of cleansing or purification. Second appears at the end and designates cleansing purification. First refers to the physiological situation which enables the purification to take place. The second refers to the status of cultic purity, results from the completion of purification rites. So cult is a word referring to Israel's sacrificial system. We got the story of Naaman, the Aramean general. After he's stricken with this scale disease, he's told that Israel is a prophet named Elisha who can cure him, so he travels to Israel, finds Elisha, tells him to dunk 7 times in the Jordan River. Naaman defiantly asks in response, "Are not rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? I could bathe in them and be..." Association of impurity with the contagiousness of disease is the rule, not the exception. medical anthropologist Ed Green, pollution is not so mystical when examined closely, mostly in the anthropological sense. Pollution, he notes the belief that people will become ill as a result of contact with or contamination by a substance or essence considered dangerous because it is pure. This down-to-earth approach to understanding purity challenges the widespread use of expressions such as religious or ritual purity to translate tumah, the Hebrew word, which suggests its implications were only for the sacred domain, entrance to the sanctuary, participation in cultic worship. Instead, the concerns surrounding tumah in ancient Israel do not appear to have been confined to the cult, but likely the whole fear of contagion. Purity laws of the Bible emphasize the ramifications of defilement for the sanctuary. Laws of normal and pathological genital emissions conclude with a following exhortation. We shall set apart the Israelites from their impurities, lest they die in their impurities by defiling my tabernacle that is among them. Rule for banishing severe impurity bearers from the camp in Numbers chapter 5 is a similar emphasis. Command the Israelites to remove from the camp any leper or gonorrhea, anyone defiled by a corpse, remove males and females alike, put them outside the camp so that they will not defile the camp where I reside in the midst. So God will not reside in a community filled with pure people. This verse, more than any other, captures the anomaly that the banishment of diseased persons from the settlement otherwise would be interpreted as reflecting a need to quarantine infectious individuals, is here reinterpreted in terms of the need to distance impurity from the site by
quote that sacrifice involves in part the controlled exercise of complete power over an animal's life and death, which is, he says, precisely one of the powers that Israel's God exercises over human beings. As God is to humanity, humans, in imitation of God, are towards their domesticated animals. So the process of sacrifice, I won't go into his argument here, but Lawans develops a strong argument that the process of sacrifice can be understood itself as an act of imitatio Dei, because sacrifice involves a variety of behaviors in the biblical text that are analogous to behaviors attributed elsewhere in the biblical text to God. The care and feeding and raising of domestic animals, the selection of one that is deemed perfect, control over its life and death, and so on. And these are all spoken of in terms that are analogous to terms used to describe God as the shepherd of his flock of Israel and in control of life and death, and so on. So Klawans argues that the process of sacrifice, which grants the offerer complete control over life and death, is a kind of imitatio Dei. But Klawan also asserts, and I quote, that imitatio Dei does not exhaustively explain sacrifice in ancient Israel. And in fact, we should be surprised if any one single theory would indeed explain sacrifice. So he just says that there are really two organizing principles or overriding concerns.
One should not read the book of Leviticus as instructions on how to avoid infection, nor should we view Moses as playing the role of public health commissioner. Nevertheless, one only needs to scratch the surface of these texts to reveal that explicit rhetoric concerns conceals a more down-to-earth role for purity in ancient Israel, related to the control and treatment of contagious disease. Priestly sources near total absorption of impurity into the realm of the court constituted nothing less bringing the chaotic world of disease under the hegemony of God. Short tumah, impurity is indeed religious, but this religion is not out there in the heavens. No, this thing very close, maybe too close. So Judaism is a very practical religion. It's the most this worldly of the world's religions, has more focus on this life, talks very little about the next world by comparison. Instead, Judaism is concerned with the mundane, the day-to-day, with how you do business, how you get up in the morning, how you clean your house, what you eat. It's a very unromantic religion in comparison to a romantic religion of Christianity.
In the priestly traditions and the priestly materials regarding sacrifice. The first, as we've seen, is imitatio Dei, but the second is a desire to attract and maintain the divine presence, the continued presence of God in the sanctuary. The majority of the sacrifices that are described in the opening chapters of Leviticus, in Leviticus 1 through 7, are voluntary sacrifices. These are sacrifices that are offered as gifts or in times of celebration. Put a little list of them up here, but the first three are the ones that will concern us now. We have, first of all, a whole offering, or burnt offering, it's sometimes called. This is when an animal is entirely burnt to create, as the text says, a pleasant-smelling odor or pleasant-smelling smoke that ascends to God. According to P, the priests are to offer 2 such burnt offerings with pleasing-smelling odors to the Lord every day, one in the morning and one in the evening, on a regular basis from the community. The second kind of offering that's described is the grain offering. This is a gift of...
And Josh sends along Dr. Milton Wolf's tweet. His advice for surviving the Wuhan coronavirus: number 1, stay calm. Number 2, wash your hands. Number 3, turn off the garbage news media. All right, back to Jacob Milgram's book on Leviticus. The distinction between animals that are abominable and those that are impure. So one thing that Judaism does is it keeps making distinctions between that which is filthy and that which is pure, that which is good, that which is bad, that which is filled with life, and that which is connotes death. So animals that are abominable, created from the sea, and those that are impure from the land. Leviticus 11 is rooted in Genesis 1, signifies that from the priestly point of view, God's revelation is twofold: to Israel via Mount Sinai and the revelation of the Torah, and the second revelation is to all of humanity via nature. God saw that it was good, which is a repeat of the book of Genesis. Common with Israel's contemporaries, the priestly code holds that God punishes humanity through a flood. Genesis chapter 6 through plague, Exodus 7, 8, 9, and sickness in Leviticus 13. It is, however, the priestly's straight as distinctive teaching that nature maintains a balance between the forces of life and death. It is incumbent on the human being that by dint of one's intelligence discern the difference between them and to act accordingly. Israel is charged with the additional obligation to distinguish between pure and impure, and that provides Israel with a larger database for distinguishing between forces of life and death. P, in detect earliest gropings toward an ecological position. The blood prohibition: you're not allowed in Judaism to consume an animal's blood. It's an index of P's concern for the welfare of humanity. Blood prohibition appears in Genesis in the part of the Noahide laws, which states that all human society is viable only if it desists from the shedding of human blood and the ingestion of animal blood. So Genesis chapter 9 declares a fundamental premise that human beings can curb their violent nature through ritual means, through dietary discipline, that will drive home the point that all life, including that of animals, is inviolable, except in the case of meat when conceded by God. Peace strand Genesis also indicts the human race for its tendency towards violence. Noahide laws of Genesis 9 are the legal remedy for this reckless violence. So P says there's a universal God who's imposed a basic ritual moral code upon humanity. Israel, bound by its covenantal relationship with God, is enjoined to follow an even stricter code of conduct. So from the Jewish perspective, all good people get a place in the world to come, but just being a decent person is not enough from Jews because of their particular relationship with God. They're expected to obey the Torah, not just be generally decent. So Judaism prescribes 7 basic Noahide laws for all humanity: don't murder, don't kidnap, set up courts of law, don't engage in incest, bestiality, or homosexuality. 7 basic moral principles that Judaism expects from all humanity, and if humanity obeys these basic moral principles, then it has a place in the world to come. As for Jews, the Torah prescribes 613 basic commandments. One would expect a sharp cleavage separating the priestly theology from the non-priestly strands of the Pentateuch. Even the 2 priestly sources, P and H, sharply diverge on many theological fundamentals. Sacrificial system is intimately connected with the impurity system, but it possesses distinctive theologies of its own. No single theory embraces the entire complex of the sacrificial system. Sacrifices of ancient Israel cover the gamut of psychological, emotional, and religious needs of the people. So, whether it's to give thanks or to purify yourself, the ancient Israel sacrificial system that covers the gamut of the entire psychological, emotional, and religious needs of the people. And I wish that we had a sacrificial system too.
Flour and oil and incense, which is burned after a portion is removed for the priests, as dues to the priest. The rest is burned on the altar, again with a sweet smell from the incense. Third, we have a set of offerings known as well-being offerings, peace offerings is sometimes translated. These offerings are generally consumed by the offerer and his family, very often in a festive or situation. That's a big feast. After certain portions are donated to the priests again. Well-being offerings are of three main types. You have the Thanksgiving offering. You have a free will offering, just because.
So there are all sorts of things that can incredibly enhance your life that just don't make sense, right? A woman may come into your life and it just doesn't make rational sense to make room for her in your life, but you find that you can't live without her. Then I remember participating in Kundalini yoga for a couple of years, and when the teachers would teach, much of it just didn't make sense to me, but I love the classes. I love the sense of holiness, separation, and distinction that I got from Kundalini yoga. I love the practices. I got a girlfriend there. The ratio of women to men was like 3-to-1. People were nice. So even though it didn't necessarily make sense to me, it spoke to part of me that was perhaps beyond the rational. Then when I became interested in Orthodox Judaism, it wasn't the sublimity of its teachings, it wasn't the rationality of the Torah that swept me away. It was practice of Orthodox Judaism, of living in that kind of intense community. When you celebrate Shabbat meals with people, you celebrate holidays with people, you do business with each other, you try to help out each other's business, you try to help each other with their health concerns, with their children concerns, you give each other rides, you pick each other up from the airport, you're in it together. That's what I found so moving about Orthodox Judaism. It just spoke to some part of my soul that was beyond just simply rational concerns. So, human being isn't just cognitive.
Because someone wants to do that, a free will offering. And you have a vow offering that would be offered on the successful completion of a vow, for example. And these sacrifices are all entirely optional. They were offered in celebration, they were offered in Thanksgiving, or upon the successful completion of a vow. In other words, the sacrificial cult was primarily a vehicle for worshippers' expression of a wide range of emotions, joy over the birth of a child, thankfulness for a good harvest, and so on. Now, texts from ancient Near Eastern cultures suggest that a central function of the rituals that were performed in sanctuaries was to secure the perpetual aid and blessing of a well-disposed deity. And in important ways, the Israelite cult is strikingly similar, particularly in the sacrifices I've just described. The Israelites certainly hoped to secure the perpetual aid and blessing and protection of a well-disposed deity. Blessing and benefaction flow from God's presence in the midst of the community, in his sanctuary. When he is there, there is blessing. So Klawans follows earlier scholars in suggesting that the rituals and sacrifices performed in the sanctuary were designed to ensure God's continued residence within and blessing of.
Right, so you don't even have to think about God. You want certain dynamics operating in your life, whether it's profitability, prosperity, connection to other people, good health, then you need to engage in certain practices. You need to organize your life along certain lines to perpetuate the values that you seek or to perpetuate your goals. This isn't just a religious conversation that we're having here, but it's important to set up your life in a way that you have all these prompts, all these incentives, all these systems that are pushing you towards what you want to achieve in life rather than allowing, say, the New York Times to set the agenda, or your own hormones to set the agenda, or your own basic inclinations to set the agenda. Right, so let's talk about the burnt offering in chapter 1 of Leviticus. It's for the individual who desires to present a sacrificial animal to God as an expression of loyalty or as a request for expiation to become clean. So one of the great things about 12-step work is this sense of becoming clean. When you get clarity on your past, on clarity about the people you've damaged, when you get clarity about your role in various disputes, your role in resentment you might be carrying around, when you get to see your role in passionate disputes you've had with now ex-friends or ex-business partners, then if you see that you have amends to make and you start making amends, you just start feeling progressively cleaner, and you just don't want to stop making amends. You don't want to stop getting clarity on the wreckage of the past, because it comes down to the question, like, how free do you want to be? How clean do you want to be? You just want to keep going through life, moderately free, but if instead you engage in a little more introspection and moral rigor, and you look at your life from the perspective of other people, from neutral parties, from the perspective of people you had conflicts with, and you see that you're in error, that you bear some blame for things going wrong with past employers or past girlfriends, then how free do you want to be? Like, how happy do you want to be? How clean do you want to be? Or do you just want to keep dragging through life this whole burden of resentment and guilt? Okay, cereal offering. Chapter 2 is intended for the same purpose as the burnt offering, but it's just for the poor people who can't afford to sacrifice an entire animal. Then you've got the well-being offering in chapter 3. It's an offering brought solely out of joy. It's a thanksgiving, it's a vow fulfillment, or a spontaneous free will offering. It's just an offering that you do out of joy. So the rationale for the purification offering. It's the priestly version of the picture of Dorian Gray. It declares that while sin may not scar the face of the sinner, it does scar the face of the sanctuary. So all the choices that we've made, they form certain neurological pathways in our brain, so that we turn the corner and we see someone unexpectedly, our face will often give us away. Or we will often respond to a particular stimulus completely differently than other people. So the coronavirus is a particular stimulus. So are we looking at it accurately, or do we have all sorts of baggage which is getting in the way of seeing the challenge of the coronavirus accurately? So we may think that we've forgotten horrible things that we've done to other people in the past, and it doesn't matter anymore. Now we're just enjoying life, but it still builds up, akin to the novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. So this image illustrates the priestly version of the old doctrine of collective responsibility. Evildoers are punished, they bring down the righteous with them. Those who perish with the wicked are not entirely blameless. They are inadvertent sinners. Having allowed the wicked to flourish, have contributed to the pollution of the sanctuary. So the Torah perspective is, if you can't limit the damage that wicked people are doing around you, you need to move to a place where you can construct a civilized society. If you just hang out with the filthy, with the degenerate, with the slobs, you will inevitably experience the repercussions that their filthy behavior brings. The high priest and the leaders of the people bring special sacrifices for their errors that cause harm to their people. So the sanctuary is polluted because society is polluted by brazen sins, the selfishness of the leaders, and by inadvertent sins, the acquiescence of the silent majority. The result, that God is driven out of the sanctuary. You don't have to think about this in godly or religious terms, that if you allow a certain amount of filth and degradation around you and just make peace with it, then good things are going to be driven out. Civilization is going to be driven out of your community. In the theology of the purification offering, Israel is so close to the beliefs of its neighbors, yet so far from them. Both hold that the sanctuary stands in need of constant purification, lest it be abandoned by its resident God. So yesterday I spent about 3 hours cleaning. I bought a carpet cleaner and I did a vacuum. I moved stuff around. I just did a long carpet cleaning of my entire apartment. Just feels so good to be clean. I like doing that same sort of thing, but on a spiritual and moral level with regard to my 12-step work. Whereas the pagans hold that the source of impurity is demonic, Israel, having expunged the demons from its beliefs, attributes impurity to the rebellious and inadvertent sins of humanity.
The community, in particular, the daily burnt offerings sacrificed by the priest twice each day and emitting this pleasing odor. These were an effort to attract the deity. Likewise, the gifts, the other foods and pleasing odors of the sacrifices brought by individual worshippers attracted and maintained the continued presence of God in the sanctuary. So this is the second overriding concern or organizing principle of the sacrifice. Not simply that there should be imitatio Dei within God's realm, but also that the activities there should attract and maintain the presence of the deity for the well-being of the community. But just as God is attracted by certain kinds of behaviors, so he is repelled by others. And in the priestly system, grave sins generate an impurity, now a moral.
Okay, so in 2 days it will be the anniversary of my father's death. One of my father's specialties was in doctrine of the investigative judgment and what's going on in the heavenly sanctuary. So let me just play a minute here from my father speaking October 30th, 2010 at the Sydney Adventist Forum in Morisset, which is where I grew up in Australia.
When the news came through that this was to be thrown back.
Okay, that's this is the
So
biography of my father.
It was all about the authority of Ellen White. It was all about the investigative judgment.
So this man, Milton Hook, published a biography of my father, which I found very moving. I just read it straight through in one night.
Judgment, which was lauded as Adventism's unique contribution to Christian theology. One of the chief reasons for the existence. Basically, it was all about church politics. It was all about administrative ego. It was all about church tradition versus the leading of the Spirit. It was all of these factors, quite complicated. In my naivety at the time, I said, it'll be all right. But it was not all right. Theirs was uprooted. Thankfully, it was transplanted in a fruitful orchard. But that vast, open-cut mind left has continued to condemn the church. There is a famous Aboriginal saying that goes something like this: "You cannot live in the past. But the past lives in us." Very simple truth, isn't it? You cannot live. But the past lives in us. We cannot escape it. It's become a part of us. The past lives in us. We were forever changed by grace of personally. So today we have come to rehearse some of those events because it is part of us. This is going to begin our program today with a Bible study. But before he does, I would like to offer a prayer and invite you, each one, to bow your heads and ask for a blessing throughout our meeting.
9 years before my father died.
Thank you, Lord, for prompting us. For good news, may our hearts be inspired as we listen. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Hook. We've heard a historian's verdict, and we should consider it seriously. Wonderful to see so many friends of yesteryear. Thank you for coming. I trust you will pray that Lord will be our teacher.
So my father was mentally sharp, right up to his last month of life.
Today, and overrule our human weaknesses and our human ignorance. I would invite you to join with me in meditation on an epoch in the life of an ancient king whose tragic experience was a microcosm of the greatest problem in the universe. A mirror, indeed, humanly speaking, of God's problem. The king is on his throne, anxiously shifting from here to there, thinking of his boys, one who's been murdered, the other in exile, but the apple of his father's eye. A boy who was beautiful, and we don't use that term usually of males, but this boy was beautiful from head to toe, but an ugly heart. The man who had given him life loved him. Now he had a big problem. He was a king and he was a father. As a king, he should punish wickedness, uphold righteousness. As a father, how could he hurt the son of his love? What a problem. How do you reconcile justice and mercy? Then the king notices an old lady through the window, dressed in garb of mourning, and she's heading for the palace. And soon, as recorded in 2 Samuel 14, she's telling the king a pitiful story would stir any heart, let alone David's heart. But it was not an appeal to conscience, it was an appeal to unjustified mercy. And in 2 Samuel 14:14, the climax is reached when she says, "We must needs die. We are as water that's spilled on the ground and cannot be gathered up again." Yet does God devise means that is banished, be not expelled from him. What a wonderful summary of the gospel. We must needs die. I'm older than when you saw me last. So are you. We must needs die as water spilled on the ground that cannot be gathered up again. Yet.
Yeah, death was one of my father's favorite topics. He loved talking about death because it captured people's attention. My father enjoyed speaking at funerals more than any other place because people took him more seriously there. My brother's nickname for my father was not Desmond, but Deathman, Dr. Deathman. My brother would refer to it.
But despite this, our Heavenly Father devises means that He's banished us. Be not expelled forever from His presence. What a great.
Okay, that's my dad just 9 years before his death. Okay, let's see what Bernie Sanders has to say about closing borders.
We're going to move on to the next audience question, but if you had to, would you close down the border?
No. I mean, what you don't want to do right now, we have a president who has propagated xenophobic anti-immigrant sentiment from before he was elected. What we need to do is have the scientists take a hard look at what we need to do. There are communities where the virus is spreading. What does that mean? It may mean self-quarantine, maybe not having public assemblies. But let's not go back to the same old thing. Isn't it interesting that a president who has been demagoguing and demonizing immigrants, the first thing that he could think about is closing down the border? So we need scientists to tell us the appropriate approach, not a political approach.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next audience question, but if you had...
Okay, thanks, Bernie. Great.
Moral impurity. So now we're coming to the second kind of impurity, a moral impurity that repels the divine presence. Okay, so moral impurity is the second kind of impurity that's described by Klawans and others. In contrast to ritual impurity, moral impurity does arise from the commission of sin. Ritual impurity does not. Nothing that's prohibited about you. You're never told not to become ritually impure. Okay, there's nothing sinful about it inherently. But moral impurity arises specifically from the commission of certain heinous sins specifically. And the three that I've listed here are the biggies: idolatry, homicide, and sexual transgression. These are spelled out in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, those two chapters. Besides defiling the sinner, moral impurity symbolically defiles various sancta, especially the sanctuary, but also God's name, and also the Holy Land itself. Moral impurity differs from ritual impurity, not simply because of its origin in sin, but also in the fact that it's not contagious. Right? You don't contract impurity by touching a murderer, the way that you contract ritual impurity by touching somebody with gonorrhea. Okay? Also, moral impurity is not removed or reducible through ritual, through washings and launderings, ritual ablutions, and the like. That does not touch moral impurity in a person. Moral purity of persons can be achieved only by punishment for heinous sins. For example, the punishment of harate, or cutting off, is a divine punishment, being extirpated from the house of Israel, or death. Right? That's one way to be rid of moral impurity. Also, it can be achieved by simply avoiding or abstaining from defiling immoral acts in the first place. That's another way to achieve moral purity. Also, if you atone for unwitting sins that you perhaps later realize and regret, acknowledge, and confess, then that can also have a reduced moral impurity. Very severe moral impurity defiles the innermost areas of the sanctuary as well as the land. Now, the sanctuary can be purified of moral impurity, and I'll come back and talk about that in a second, but the land really cannot. Land that is repeatedly defiled, or the Holy Land of God, that is repeatedly defiled by sexual transgressions, for example, cannot be purified. Eventually, it will simply vomit out, the biblical text says, it will simply vomit out those who dwell on it. This is a reference to exile. This is consistent with the representation of the expulsion of the Canaanites from God's land. Remember when God said the sin of the Amorites is not yet complete? When they have sinned so much and to such a degree, they will be vomited out, and then your tendency can begin. The land will purge itself of the impurity by vomiting them out. And this is consistent then with the repeated warnings in Leviticus to the Israelites not to engage in similar abominable and sinful practices, the sexual transgressions, the bloodshed, the idolatry, because they too will pollute the land until it vomits them out. They will be expelled. The land.
Okay, back to Jacob Milgram's commentary here on Leviticus. The priestly polemic against paganism was informed by ethical postulates. The impurity system pits the forces of life against the forces of death, reaching an ethical summit in the blood prohibition. Not only is blood identified with life, it is also declared inviolable. The unauthorized taking of animal life is equated with murder. How much more so is the illegal taking of human life? So only a tiny number of animals allowed to be killed for eating, and then only under certain conditions, so Jews do not hunt. If the long list of prohibited animals has as its aim the restriction of meat to 3 domestic quadrupeds whose blood must be offered up on the altar of the central sanctuary, what else could the compliant Israelite derive from this arduous discipline, except that all life must be treated with reverence? The reduction of sanctum contagion may be motivated by the desire to wean Israel from the universally attested morbid fear of approaching the sanctuary. There also existed the more practical goal of breaking equally current belief that the sanctuary gave asylum to criminals. Ethical current ran strong in the rationale for the sacrifices. Purification offering taught the ecology and morality that the sins of the individual adversely affect one's society. Yeah, everything you do affects other people. Everything you do, even in private. If your private choice is to watch TV rather than, say, read Crime and Punishment, if your private choice is to listen to rap music as opposed to classical music, if your private choice is to eat junk food rather than healthy food, everything you do affects other people. None of us is an island. Okay, so the sins of the individual adversely affect one's society. Think about that Pakistani in Italy who was told to quarantine himself after he tested positive for the coronavirus, but he kept preparing and distributing food, and thereby became patient zero in northern Italy. And as a result, thousands of people have been infected and dozens of people have died. So the sins of the individual can adversely affect one's society. We can uplift our society through our private and public behavior, or we can degrade it. Even when our sins are committed inadvertently, the reparation offering becomes the vehicle for a doctrine of repentance. The ethical thrust of these two sacrifices can be shown to be evident in other aspects as well. Recently, legislators did not prescribe the purification offering just for cultic violations. They extended the meaning of the term communal to embrace the broader area of ethical violations. Now, you didn't get ethical cleansing just from bringing a sacrifice for moral sins. You had to repair the damage done by your harm to other people with the people that you harmed. And then to celebrate the repair of that damage, you can then bring sacrifice to the temple. In matters of expiation, persons take precedence over God. So you can't show up to God in the Jewish perspective to get forgiveness after you've hurt another human being. You can only go to that person you've hurt. Then, after you've made it right with that person, then go to God. Only after rectification has been made with the person who you have hurt can it be sought with God. Sacrificial texts are obsessed with the poor. Everyone, regardless of means, is able to bring an acceptable offering to the Lord. So birds are added to the roster of burnt offerings, and even a cereal offering. So if all you can offer is a little bit of grain, this was inserted after the burnt offering, implying that if a person could not even afford birds, he could bring cereal offering. Compassion for the poor is responsible for the prescribed sequence of the graduated purification offering. First, it's a flock animal, then a bird, then cereal. Concession of a cereal offering is not allowed, however, for severe impurity cases because of the need for sacrificial blood to purge the contaminated altar. Ethical impulse in the Torah attains its zenith, the great day of purgation, Yom Kippur. What began as a right to purge the sanctuary is being expanded to include a right to purge the entire people. But again, this is not the sins between man and man. This is only the sins between the individual and God. The pagan notion of demonic impurity was eviscerated by insisting that accumulated pollution in the sanctuary was caused by human sin. Another dimension was introduced that represented a more radical alteration. The scapegoat, Azazel, initially eliminated the sanctuary's impurities, but now became the vehicle of purging their source, the human heart. Provided the people purged themselves through rites of penitence, high priests would confess their released sins upon the head of the scapegoat, then dispatch it, its load of sins, into the wilderness. This rite was broadened and transformed into an annual day for the collective catharsis of Israel. God would continue to reside with Israel because his temple and his people were once again pure. Back to Christine Hayes here from Yale University.
It is also defiled by illicit homicide. There is legal homicide, of course, judicial death and so on in the Bible, but illicit homicide, whether intentional or unintentional, murder or accidental homicide. The manslayer bears blood guilt, what is referred to as blood guilt. That's a kind of moral impurity, and his life is forfeit because of that. In cases of deliberate murder, blood guilt and impurity are removed only by the death of the murderer himself. Only blood atones for blood. In cases of accidental homicide, the perpetrator can take refuge in one of 5 cities that are designated for this purpose, the 5 cities of refuge. They can live there until the death of the high priest, and the death of the high priest symbolically serves to purge or remove the blood guilt or impurity of the accidental homicide. Idolatry also defiles the land. Offenders are subject to stoning and the divine penalty of karet, of cutting off. The Bible repeatedly warns that idols and their cultic appurtenances must be completely destroyed from the Holy Land. Right? The Israelites have to eradicate their pollution.
And a question in the chat, what happens when someone doesn't want to forgive you? So if you've made a good faith attempt to repair the damage that you've done to someone else, and made that good faith attempt at least 3 times, then you're off the hook. So that's the Jewish teaching with regard to penitence, repentance, cleaning up the wreckage of your past. 12-step approach is that you make amends except when to do so would hurt you or other people. So you count 2. If going to someone from your past to try to make amends would place you in danger or would be likely to hurt you, then you don't have to make the amends with that person. Instead, you can pursue something like living amends. So if you stole from a boss, you can instead be scrupulously honest with your current employer, and you can give the money that you stole from your boss. If for some reason it would be dangerous for you to recompense your former boss, you can give that money to a good cause. In fact, Jacob Milgram's commentary here on the Levitical sacrificial system. The book of Leviticus opens with a description of the sacrifices that the Israelites are commanded to bring to the sanctuary. First glance, nothing could seem more distant from our modern lives than the system of animal sacrifice. However, behind the specific laws of sacrifice is a profound design for creating a sense of spiritual connectedness. In sacrificing, people felt a direct line of communication with God. The sight of smoke ascending heavenward be seen as a physical symbol of personal prayers and wishes rising to God. By allowing people to make their own sacrifices under the auspices of the priest, the sacrificial laws gave people a degree of control over their spiritual lives. By inviting people into the sanctuary for the sacrifice, people felt themselves personally invited into God's earthly home. The system of sacrifice provided a method for Israelites to reach God, responding to the deep psychological, emotional, and religious needs of the people. This is the meaning of the Hebrew word for sacrifice. It comes from a verb meaning to bring near. Thus, sacrifice is that kind of an offering that enables us to come near to God. The word sacrifice in English comes from a Latin word meaning to make sacred. Quintessential act of sacrifice is the transference of property from the common to the sacred realm, so making it a gift for God. As a gift, sacrifice is intended to solicit divine aid, external aid to secure fertility or victory or blessing, internal aid to ward off or forgive sin and impurity for expiation. These gifts to God to obtain blessing or forgiveness. Now, the Hebrew Bible has long followed the words of the prophet Hosea. Instead of bulls, we will pay the offering from the murmuring of our lips. Prayer. But we should recognize that the sacrificial system provides insight to the human need to feel personally connected to God and spiritually fulfilled. So why did the Israelites eagerly bring their animals to the sanctuary to be offered on the altar to God? Because early in the history of the ancient Near East, the belief prevailed that sacrifice was food for the worship of God. So Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher in the 12th century, said that the ancient sacrificial system was a way to wean the ancient Israelites off human sacrifice.
Looting the land. Now, in contrast to the land, God's sanctuary can be purified from moral impurity by means of a special sacrifice. And this is the fourth sacrifice listed here, the chatat, which is the purification sacrifice. It's often erroneously translated as a sin offering, better translated as a purification offering. How does it operate? The blood of the animal, the blood of the sacrifice, is the key to the whole ritual. Remember that impurity, sin, are often associated with death. Holiness, that which is holy, is often associated with life. And if the two are antithetical, then it makes sense. If impurity is associated with death, it makes sense that its antithesis, holiness, would be associated with life. According to the priestly source, blood, the blood that courses through one's veins, represents the life force. Remember in the Noahide covenant in Genesis 9, which is a priestly passage, the priestly blood prohibition. You may not spill human blood, and you may not eat animal flesh that has the life blood in it, because the blood is the life, and that belongs to God. That's holy, right? So the life force is holy, and the life force is in the blood. Leviticus 17, verse 11 says this. It repeats the blood prohibition, and then it offers a rationale. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have assigned it to you for making expiation for your lives upon the altar. I've assigned it to you to use in sacrificial practices. It is the blood as life that affects expiation, purging, and atonement. So the priestly text couldn't be clearer. Blood represents life. The blood of sacrificial animals is assigned by God as a detergent, if you will, to cleanse the sanctuary of the impurities that are caused by the sinful deeds of the Israelites. Sacrifices that purge the sanctuary of ritual impurity, primarily the chatat, always involve the manipulation of the animal's blood, daubing it on the altar, and on Yom Kippur, actually entering the innermost shrine and sprinkling it on the throne of God and the footstool, the ark itself. It symbolizes the victory of the forces of life and holiness over death and impurity. Other purificatory rites that are listed in the Bible will sometimes involve the use of reddish substances as a kind of surrogate of blood. It's a widely and it is widely and mistakenly thought that the purification offering purifies the sinner or the impurity bearer or the offerer. This can't be true. The chatat, the purification offering, doesn't rid a ritually impure person of their ritual impurity. You can't even offer a sacrifice unless you're already ritually pure, because you couldn't get into the sanctuary to offer your sacrifice if you weren't ritually pure. You can't.
And Coulter notes that Bernie Sanders says he rejects the socialism of Russia, Cuba, Venezuela, and China, but loves the socialism of Finland and Sweden. Those are his models. And Coulter notes the only countries where socialism works are composed of 90% plus Northern Europeans. And Coulter uses the hashtag fix immigration first.
More towards market reform.
Use their government to try to improve life for working families, not just the people on top.
So, Senator, let me follow up on that, if I may. Basically, since the 90s, if you look at examples in Sweden and Denmark, they have been lowering or cutting property taxes, lowering corporate taxes, allowing vouchers for schools, for public schools and private schools, which is one of the reasons why their education has improved. The founder of IKEA, who famously came back, left his home country, moved here, has now gone back because he says the tax environment for him is getting better. So they appear to be moving away more towards market reform and not towards what you're describing you'd like to see here.
All right, but if you, and I'm not an expert on the current economy in Sweden, but disagree with me if you want, does Sweden guarantee health care to all people as a human right?
Yeah, but they're finding other ways to pay for it because they have to
use their government to try to improve life for working families, not.
Okay, let's get back to Christine Hayes.
Approach to offer sacrifice. You're not in a state of ritual purity already. So purification offerings are brought after the genital discharge has healed and passed, after the scale disease has healed and passed, after the appropriate ablutions have been observed and the person is essentially pure. But there's one more step they have to take before they're integrated back into the community. The chatat also does not rid a sinner of their moral impurity, because the offering is brought after the sinner has confessed, after the sinner has repented. The purification offering acts on the sanctuary, not on the offerer. It purges the sanctuary of the defilement that is it has symbolically suffered.
So growing up in a Protestant country, I'm used to the focus being on the individual. Rugged individualism is the American ideal, the Anglo-Saxon ideal, but Catholic and Jewish countries are much more communally centered. So the sacrificial system is not primarily centered around, say, individual salvation, the preoccupation of Protestant Christianity. It's about keeping the community clean, keeping the community pure, keeping the community holy. Nate Silver tweets, 25% of Bernie Sanders' vote in 2016 was based on people who just did not like Hillary Clinton. He does not seem to be winning those voters this time around. They're either voting for Joe Biden or they're sitting.
Suffered from the offerer's state of ritual impurity or sinfulness. Once the sanctuary is purged, the offerer has settled his debt. He's repaired the damage he caused. He's fully atoned at one again with God. And God is no longer repelled by the impurity that marred his sanctuary. The defiling effect of lesser transgressions is calibrated to the sinner's intentionality and the presence or absence of repentance. So inadvertent sins can be purged, the sanctuary defilement that they cause can be purged by bringing a purification sacrifice. What about deliberate sin? As long as there is repentance, the biblical text says, then they are converted into inadvertent sins, and they also can be purged, or the impurity they cause can be purged with a purification sacrifice. But brazen, unrepented sins, or unintentional sins that are never realized, these stand unremedied, and they defile the sanctuary. So for this reason, the sanctuary has to be regularly purged of the accumulated defilements accruing to it as a result of such sin. Leviticus 16 describes the annual ritual, which is carried out on the Day of Atonement or Day of Purgation. It can be called Yom Kippur, when a chatat sacrifice, a purification sacrifice, is brought on behalf of the community to purify the sanctuary of the impurities that have been caused by Israel's sin. And the high priest loads all of the sins and impurities of the Israelites on the head of a goat, which then carries them off into the wilderness, away from the sanctuary. Purification of the sanctuary was believed to be critical to the health and the well-being of the community. If the sanctuary is not purged of impurity, it can become polluted to the point when God is driven out entirely. Jacob Milgram has argued that there's a kind of Archimedean principle at work here. Every sin creates an impurity that encroaches upon the realm of holiness and displaces a certain amount of holiness. And eventually, God will be completely displaced and the community will be left in a godless state without.
So we now have 133 cases of the coronavirus in California.
Blessing or protection. So Milgram sees the symbolic function of the purity system this way. If the sanctuary symbolizes the presence of God, and if impurity represents the wrongdoing of persons, then by saying that impurity is anathema to God and pollutes his temple, the priests are able to graphically convey the idea that sin forces God out of his sanctuary and out of the community.
And reporter Jonathan Lemire tweets, shaking hands, kissing babies seems really ill-advised during a health epidemic. Coronavirus precautions are hitting presidential campaign plans. Big rallies and retail politics may be curtailed as health officials seek to limit the spread of infection.
Jacob Milgram sees a moral message at the base of this complex symbolic picture, and that is that humans and humans alone are responsible for the reign of wickedness and death or the reign of righteousness and life. Human actions determine the degree to which God can dwell on earth among his people. So the goal or the objective of the priestly construction or representation of Israel's impurity laws was, in Milgram's view, to sever impurity from the demonic and to reinterpret it as a symbolic system reminding Israel of the divine imperative to reject sin, to behave in ways that attract the presence of God and do not repel him. You also read an article by Milgram where Milgram talks about priestly cultic imagery serving as a kind of theodicy. A theodicy, of course, is a response to the problem of evil. How can an all-powerful, good God allow so much evil to exist and even go unpunished? And according to Milgram, this is the priestly answer. Every sin pollutes the sanctuary. It may not mark the sinner, but it does mark the sanctuary. It scars the face of the sanctuary. You may think you've gotten away with something, but every act of social exploitation, every act of moral corruption.
But Princeton University and Amherst College have closed down. Remote learning will begin after spring break at Amherst College. Princeton going online with its classes. And maybe we should follow Italy's direction, putting all of Italy under the same lockdown rules. Was it the I Stay Home decree? The Italian Prime Minister, people can only move around for work reasons, transport of essential goods, other pressing needs, or for health reasons. Something like that. United States reaction to the coronavirus.
Pollutes the sanctuary more and more until such time as God is driven out entirely and human society is devoured by its own viciousness and death dealing. So again, the ethical message here is that humans are in control of their destiny, and the action of every individual affects and influences the fate of society. This is really the priestly version of an old biblical doctrine, a doctrine of collective responsibility.
And Miggy tweets, doctors in Italy have decided to ration care as a matter of triage. Diabetics and cancer patients aren't getting intubated. This is going to happen in Canada and other socialized medicine countries. Our system's already straining without the virus. Perhaps they need to shut down schools now.
Individual sin affects the entire fabric of society. There's no such thing as an isolated evil. Our deeds affect one another. And when evildoers are finally punished, they bring down others with them. Those others, however, aren't so blameless, Milgram says, because they allowed the wicked to flourish and contribute to the pollution of the sanctuary, the corruption of society. So his cultic imagery is informed, according to Milgram, by the same communal ethic that we will see running through the Bible, much of the Bible, until a later period.
So, yeah, communal ethic as opposed to individual ethic. So if you look at the Jewish prayer book, the Siddur, almost all the prayers are for the collective. While if you look at the emphasis in Protestant Christianity, it's on individual salvation. So the Jewish and also the Catholic approaches are more communal, and the Protestant approach is more individualistic. Probably not just a religious difference here, but probably springs from the nature of these different peoples. Different peoples genetically, of course, practice Judaism or practice Catholicism or practice Protestantism. Steve Saylor tweeted that America's doctors are the best paid doctors in the world. Maybe we are headed towards a moment where either noblesse oblige kicks in or it doesn't. I am moderately optimistic that our doctors, like European aristocrats in 1914, will feel that all those fat years have obliged them to step up.
It's simply conveying that ethic in its own modality through the symbolism of the sanctuary and the cult. The 11th chapter of Leviticus deals with the dietary laws. We don't have time to go into them at any great length. I will say that Milgram has also argued that the dietary laws of Leviticus are similarly part of a symbol system that emphasizes life over death.
Wall Street Journal from a week ago, Tim Cook and Apple bet everything on China, then coronavirus hit. Quarantines, tariffs, and slumping sales have caused agitation about the company's strategy of assembling most of its products there. So thinking there's got to be permanent changes in supply chains. People are seeing the weaknesses of depending entirely upon China. They're going to want to produce more things at home. They're going to want to protect vital industries dealing with pharmaceuticals and vital health equipment, and they're not going to want their businesses to be vulnerable to just one country like China. I think this will be permanent changes in our supply chains.
This is the following evidence that he cites. The mainstays of the dietary laws are these. First, the prohibition against eating animal blood from Genesis 9, which symbolizes the life. We also, in Leviticus 11, meet dietary laws that are governed by criteria such as cud chewing and having a split hoof. You can only eat animals that chew the cud and have a split hoof. And those criteria seem arbitrary and meaningless in and of themselves, and he says they are. But look at their practical effect. That limits the number of animals that one can eat to a mere handful out of the hundreds upon hundreds of creatures on the earth. That basically leaves you with, my animal husbandry is not good here, but it leaves you with the bovine and the ovine classes. I guess ovine are goats and some such. So it leaves you basically with goats and sheep and cattle.
And as a reaction to the coronavirus, South Korea is now implementing a universal basic income. Maybe that would be a good idea for the United States so people could stay home for a couple of weeks and reduce the transmission of the coronavirus.
Some have hypothesized that whatever the origin of various food taboos in Israel, the priestly texts have tried to create a dietary discipline that drives home the point that all life, shared also by animals, is inviolable, except in the case of meat, which has been conceded by God, and provided that the animals are slaughtered properly, painlessly, and that their blood, which is symbolic of the life, is not appropriated, but returned to God, its sacred source. So perhaps as it stands, the system of dietary laws does in fact emphasize reverence for life, but they also serve another very important function, and that was the formation and maintenance of a differentiated ethnic identity.
Yeah, so part of the reason for the laws of kosher is that it encourages Jews to eat with other Jews, to gather at kosher restaurants. So most Orthodox Jews would, take that for granted. Non-Orthodox Jews would kind of regard that element of it as primitive. So this is Dr. Drew here on the coronavirus.
So you've seen pandemics over the decades.
Yes.
How does this one compare with everything?
A bad flu season is 80,000 dead. We've got about 18,000 dead from influenza this year. We have 100 from corona. Which should you be worried about, influenza or corona? 100 versus 18,000. Right. Okay, it's not a trick question. And look, everything that's going on with the New York cleaning the subways and everyone using Clorox wipes and get your flu shot, which should be the other message, that's good. That's a good thing. So I have no problem with the behaviors. What I have a problem with is the panic and the fact that businesses are getting destroyed and people's lives are being upended, not by the virus, but by the panic. The panic must stop. And the press, they really somehow need to be held accountable because they are hurting people.
So where do you think the panic started? Like, what, besides the press, like what was the impetus in terms of mass hysteria?
I saw it. There's a footage of me on a show called The Daily Blast Live a month ago going, shouldn't we be scared about this? And me going, no, there's going to be this potential for panic here. Right. Shut up, everybody. Stop talking about it. I can see the panic brewing. And I can just see it the way the innuendo and the every opportunity for drama by the press was twisted in that direction. Let me give you an example. The World Health Organization is out now saying the fatality rate from the virus is 3.4%, right? Every publication from the WHO says 3.4%, and we expect it to fall dramatically once we understand the full extent of the illness. No one ever reports the actual statement. Right. They go 3.4%. That's 10 times more than 5 times more than the flu virus. And yeah, it's going to be a little more flu probably. Yeah. Still not a bad flu.
Right, we're going to hear about more cases, more people dying.
Probably somebody in this, several people in this building probably have it and don't know it.
Right. Well, it was also just the process of letting the public know, the stock market, the number of tests that were available. There was so much happening. I think people were freaking out as a result of that.
I think there was concerted effort by the press to capture your eyes, and in doing so, they did it by inducing panic. Listen, the CDC and the WHO, they know what they're doing. They contain pandemics. That's what they know how to do. They're doing an amazing job. Amazing. Listen to them.
What about the global implications of this? Because we were talking off camera about Italy. There's China as
well.
well.
There's some little outbreaks where you should avoid.
Right.
There are. I would look out where the flu's outbreaking bad too. I ended up getting the bird flu. I got H1N1.
Oh, really?
And it was horrible. It was no fun.
How long did you have that?
Well, that was 10 years ago, and I was really sick for about 2 weeks. I was really sick. And no fun.
Were you talking about bird flu like you're talking about coronavirus?
I was not, because there wasn't the same panic.
Right.
To me, back then, it was like that was a reasonable sort of, it should be in the press. It should be raised awareness. It shouldn't be the lead story every day with, again, the drama and the seriousness in everybody's tone. It's a moderate flu season. If you put the corona and the flu together, it's still a moderate flu season. Wash your hands, take precautions, do what you're supposed to do, get your flu shot.
Well, social media also plays a huge part in this too.
It does, I think. But again, the stuff on social media has generally been more moderate. It's at least back and forth.
Right.
And in the media, it's just one direction, in the news media, the cable news media particularly. And that's irresponsible.
Have you been surprised by the reaction to stuff you're saying? I mean, you've talked about stuff like this.
Yeah,
a lot. I feel like
there's certain things. Having been a physician for almost 40 years, there's certain things I just know. The homeless thing, for instance, is something I've been talking a lot about. Yeah, and I know who the homeless are. They're my patients. I know these things, and there's certain things I just know by virtue of all the experience I've had. And so when I saw this one come in the corona, I thought I know how this is going to go. I see kind of what it is, and then I saw the excessive reaction of the press, so I have to respond. And then people, the weird part on social media towards me is people are angry with me for trying to get them to see reality.
Right, you're just putting your point of view out there.
Trying to help. Right. Not saying don't do all the things you're being told to do. I'm saying it's good. We should do this every year, but don't panic.
Right.
And that's offensive to people. Don't panic.
Well, that's kind of the world we live in. Think about that. You're telling people just to calm down for a second, and you're getting backlash.
Right. And so to me, that is the story. The story is our hair is on fire about everything, and this is just a good example in my world of how people catch their hair on fire about something that. Here's what's alive and well, something called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
What's that?
No. Dunning-Kruger effect is a couple psychologists, Dr. Dunning and Dr. Kruger, realize that there's a cognitive distortion for people that don't really know the landscape of a particular topic. It's what allows people to get up on American Idol and sing and sound like hell and go, don't I sound great? They don't know good things. They're not exposed to it. And the same thing is true in many areas of science. So right now, everybody thinks they're an expert on everything. They're not. That is Dunning-Kruger. People that are real experts feel like imposter, which is the opposite of a Dunning-Kruger, because you realize how vast the topic is, how complicated it is. You never feel like you know enough. But in social media, Dunning-Kruger is alive.
So from when you first spoke about coronavirus to now, any changes at all?
In my opinion? Essentially not. Almost no opinion. The only thing I've adjusted.
Okay, looking at national interest, China threatens to throw America into the mighty sea of the coronavirus. China is threatening to wreak havoc on America's drug supply amid the Wuhan coronavirus outbreak. Thanks to our globalist elite, especially to missteps during the Obama-Biden administration, Beijing has the power to do that. In an article in one of the Chinese communist papers, Mouthpieces, Beijing threatens that it can impose pharmaceutical export controls, after which America will be plunged into the mighty sea of the coronavirus. Beijing isn't bluffing about this capability. It's Rosemary Gibson, co-author of China RX, exposing the risks of America's dependence on China for medicine, testified to a congressional commission last summer. China has a dominant role in the manufacture of the generic drugs that comprise 90% of what Americans take. This critical vulnerability isn't just in finished drugs, but what are called active pharmaceutical ingredients, some 80% of which America now imports. Most of these come from Red China. Another major source is India. Foremost culprit is the globalist cabal that exported our industries to China in the name of free trade. Within 4 years of passage of the Clinton-era law giving China unfettered access to U.S. markets and WTO, World Trade Organization membership. The last penicillin fermentation plant in the U.S. closed. China's vitamin C cartel forced the closure of the last U.S. production facility, and the last aspirin manufacturing facility ceased business because of predatory pricing by Chinese firms. Chinese government used its favorite playbook to make the world dependent on its drugs, protecting and subsidizing domestic manufacturers to undersell American competitors, aided by Chinese industrial espionage. Biotechnology is one of 10 categories of Beijing's Made in China 2025 industrial strategy, which has driven so much of its theft of intellectual property and dumping of goods at below market prices to kill U.S. businesses.
Or in priestly parlance, the formation and maintenance of a holy people separated out from other nations by rules that mark her as God's people. It's surely significant that the dietary laws are followed by a powerful exhortation to be holy in imitation of God. Leviticus 11:43-45. So we've just had the prohibition of not eating certain kinds of small animals, designated here as anything that swarms. And the text says, "You shall not draw abomination upon yourselves through anything that swarms. You shall not make yourselves impure therewith, and thus become impure. For I, the Lord, am your God. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not make yourselves impure through any swarming thing that moves upon the earth. For I, the Lord, am he who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall be holy, for I am holy." Look how much this is emphasized. The dietary laws are presented by the priest, not as a hygienic regimen. Who knows if that's how they started? Not as a sensible way to avoid various diseases that are caused by the lack of refrigeration in the desert. Whatever the actual origin of these various dietary taboos, they are here embedded in a larger ideological framework concerning the need for the Israelites to separate themselves and to be holy like their God. The dietary laws are connected then with this theme of imitatio Dei, of imitation of God. As God is holy, separate and distinct, so you shall be holy. Just want to take 2 last minutes to quickly point to this theme of holiness that continues in the section referred to as the Holiness Code. Because this theme and the exhortation, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy," they find their fullest expression in the block of text, Leviticus 17-26, that's referred to as the Holiness Code. There's an important difference between Leviticus 1-16 and the Holiness Code. According to Leviticus 1-16, Israel's priests are designated as holy, a holy class within Israel, singled out, dedicated to the service of God, and demarcated by rules that apply only to them. Israelites may aspire to holiness, but it's not assumed. However, in the Holiness Code, we have texts that come closer to the idea that Israel itself is holy, by virtue of the fact that God has set Israel apart from the nations to himself, to belong to him, just as he set apart the seventh day to himself, to belong with him. Holy things only exist because of safeguards, rules that keep them separate, that demarcate them. And these safeguards and rules are naturally addressed to human beings. They are the ones charged with the task of preserving the holy in its residence on earth. So although holiness derives from God, humans have a crucial role to play in sanctification, in sanctifying the world. That's illustrated in the case of the Sabbath. God sanctified the Sabbath at creation. He demarcated it as holy. But Israel's the one to affirm its holiness by observing the rules that make it different, that mark it off as holy. So Israel doesn't just, in fact, affirm the holy status of the Sabbath, they actualize the holy status of the Sabbath. If Israel doesn't observe the prohibitions that distinguish the Sabbath as sacred, it's automatically desecrated. You shall keep the Sabbath, for it is holy for you. He who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does work on it, that person is cut off from among his kin. It is automatically desecrated and profaned if you don't observe its rules. So there are 2 components, integral and inseparable, in the concept of holiness. Initial assignment of holy status by God and establishment of rules to preserve that holy status. And secondly, actualization of that holiness by humans through the observance of the commandments and rules that mark that thing off as holy. It's going to lead us very nicely into an understanding of the laws that mark off Israel's status and keep Israel distinct among the nations, which we'll be looking at on Wednesday. So please.
Okay, his commentary on Putin and Russia.
We'll see how courageous and sincere you are. They don't do it.
Putin is a hypocrite.
He doesn't allow ethno-nationalism in Russia because he feels it would have a destructive effect on a multi-ethnic. Meanwhile, his intelligence services are recruiting ethno-nationalists in the U.S. and paying them to start a race war.
We're coming back like 100 times. I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to me. We're gonna ritualistically humiliate them. I am coming back here every weekend if I have to. Like, this is never over. I win. They lose. That's how the world works. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors enslaved those pieces of. I rule the world. Those pieces of get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are going to destroy this town.
Who's financing the effort to create a race war in the U.S.? Putin's chef, Yevgeny Prigozhin, a longtime Russian mobster, was previously sentenced to 12 years in prison for charges including the prostitution of minors. As the Soviet Union collapsed, he was freed and is now an oligarch receiving billions of dollars in state contracts from Putin. He's an important figure who funds the Wagner, a Russian private military contractor fighting in Syria, Ukraine, and throughout Africa. He also owns the Internet Research Agency, which is why he's sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury. The House Intelligence Committee released over 3,500 Facebook and Instagram ads created by the Internet Research Agency, more than half of which focused on race. Let's take a look at an ad by one of their groups called Black Matter. Quote, "What's life of Black American today? How equal are we? Have you ever been hurt by aggressive police officers because of your race? What's your story? Take an action and tell us your story, and we post it on Black Matter. We don't want our community to continue struggling with racism and police aggression. We want to fight back and to show how strong we are."
Okay, here's a look at CNN's coverage of the coronavirus a month ago. Coronavirus task force, another example of Trump administration's lack of diversity. So that was what was on CNN's mind when it came to the Trump administration's reaction to the coronavirus. That damned lack of diversity. That's the most important thing here. Like, who needs competence? And you could have diversity.
Okay. Together with that, there's another process. Law enforcement, law and order organization and structure is being eroded. For the last 20, 25 years, if you see old movies and new movies, you can see that in new movies, a policeman, an officer of the United States Army looks dumb, angry, psychotic, paranoid. A criminal looks nice, kind of, well, he smokes hash and shoots the whatever drug, but basically he's a nice human being. He's creative. And he's unproductive only because society oppresses him. Whereby a general of Pentagon is always, by definition, a dumb, a war maniac. A policeman is a pig, rude policeman. He abuses his power. You know? A generalization like that. The hatred, the mistrust to the people who are supposed to protect you and enforce law and order.
Okay, that will do it for tonight. Bye-bye.